Chapter 269. As Yiguchen's words fell, the entire square fell into a deathly silence. These outer academy disciples had all witnessed Yixie's strength earlier. Not only did he unleash the powerful cultivation of the fourth transformation of the divine soul realm, but he also used the 100-sword aura. However, even then, in the end, Yiguchen still grabbed hold of the opportunity to turn defeat into victory. This turn of events caused everyone to be extremely astounded. What was that illusory dragon claw? Could it be that Sword Sect Yi has recovered his genuine chi cultivation? Otherwise, how could he use such a move? After the silence, there was an uproar. All the outer disciples saw Yiguchen's left arm suddenly transform into an azure dragon claw. He then released it and grabbed Yixie in front of him, turning the tables. Yixie was also in such a state because he didn't recover from the shock. But a win was a win, and a loss was a loss. Yixie wasn't a petty person. I lost. Yixie smiled bitterly and shook his head. I was the one who cheated. Yiguchen put away his meteorite soft sword and cupped his fists. Sword Sect Yi is indeed hiding his strength. That power wasn't genuine chi, right? Yixie looked deeply at Yiguchen. Yiguchen nodded slightly and didn't say anything. Don't worry. Although I'm not a man of character, I'm a man of my word. When the Void Sword Realm opens, I'll naturally take you to the Lightning Tide. But if we meet Xian Mo and the others? Yixie paused. Ha, there's no need for you to do anything. Yiguchen smiled. Don't worry, I, Yixie, am not a cold and indifferent person. Moreover, the disciples of the Sun Moon Hall are the enemies of all the disciples of the inner court of our sword sect's forest of pagodas. When Yixie spoke to this point, his tone was slightly cold. Yiguchen wasn't surprised. After all, the two sects had been in conflict for a long time and were like fire and water. As the elite gathering place of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, the inner yard naturally had conflicts with the Sun Moon Hall of the Limitless Sword Sect. The Heavenly Saber ranking of the Saber Conferred Monarch Palace and the Heavenly Immortal Palace of the Consonance Divine Palace were the places where their elites resided. I'm looking forward to the trip to the Void Sword Realm, Yiguchen murmured in his heart. When the Void Sword Realm opened, the elite disciples of the Seven Forces would all come. At that time, the battle would not be like the one in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. It would be a real battle. Moreover, Yiguchen could also use this opportunity to get in touch with the top geniuses of the Saint Origin dynasty. I wonder if Xian Hao of the Limitless Sword Sect and Gu Zun of the Sealed Saber King Palace will be there. Yiguchen thought to himself. But no matter what, Yiguchen was determined to obtain the heavenly thunder. He had a premonition that if he could obtain the exotic thunder in this trip to the Void Sword Realm and successfully break through, his strength would skyrocket and he would not be weaker than Yan Wushuang, Xian Hao, Gu Zun, and the others. After discussing some details with Yiguchen and Chu Qingqi, Yiguchen returned to his number 5 peak alone. There was only a month before the trip to the Void Sword Realm and Yiguchen would not waste any time. Although he could not cultivate his true chi for the time being, he could cultivate his soul power. As he swallowed the spirit pills one by one, the spiritual force in Yiguchen's mind became more and more vigorous. It was like a tidal wave. Perhaps it was because of his good foundation, but Yiguchen felt that his soul power was not weaker than an ordinary divine soul realm expert even though he had yet to form his sea of consciousness. If he could break through to the divine soul realm, his realm would definitely not be limited to the first transformation. For the next few days, Yiguchen was also immersed in his cultivation, forgetting himself. At night, the moonlight was cool like a pool of clear water, gilding the earth with silver. Inner Court, number 1 peak. Compared to the other peaks, number 1 peak was aloof. It was the tallest peak and was also a forbidden area for all the disciples of the inner court. There was even an array outside the number 1 peak. Even the disciples of the inner court could not enter as they wished. This was because the number 1 peak was the residence of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest's master, Yan Chang's daughter, and also the number 1 disciple of the inner court, Yan Wushuang. At this moment, on the number 1 peak, there was a pool behind a quiet pavilion. The pool water was clear and dense with spiritual qi. It was obvious that the spiritual qi here was extremely dense and had merged into the water, turning into spiritual liquid. However, there were 2 beautiful figures bathing in the jade pond. They were 2 girls. One of the girls had delicate cheeks, black hair, and an elegant figure. If Yi Guqin was here, he would definitely recognize her. This girl was Ji Ling. At this moment, Ji Ling was holding the girl's hair and was carefully combing her long hair. Although the girl's body was soaked in the water, one could still see the girl's graceful figure through the clear pool water. She also had a stunningly exquisite face. Her long eyelashes, her starry eyes that always carried a trace of indifference, her straight nose, and her slightly pursed, rosy lips formed a jade face that made people forget to leave. Especially the girl's face, which always had indifference and arrogance, could arouse the desire to conquer in the bottom of a man's heart. However, it was obvious that there were not many men who could catch her eye. Her arrogance did not come from her identity, but because she was a girl but had a super strong cultivation talent that was not inferior to male martial artists. This girl was the number 1 disciple of the inner court, Yan Wushuang. Shuang, where did you go a while ago? Ji Ling, who was combing Yan Wushuang's hair, asked. She looked at the girl in front of her with a trace of infatuation. Cultivating. Yan Wushuang did not say much. Her tone was indifferent. Then what's your cultivation now? I can't see through it. Ji Ling pouted. It was obvious that she was used to the girl's indifference. I had a small breakthrough. Divine Soul 9 transformations, Yan Wushuang said casually. Ji Ling's beautiful eyes widened in surprise. Her eyes were filled with respect. Shuang, you're too powerful. Doesn't that mean you're only a step away from the life and death threshold? How can it be so simple? The life and death threshold is a breakthrough on the line of life and death. If there is no opportunity, I might not be able to break through in my lifetime. Yan Wushuang was not happy about her cultivation and her tone was still indifferent. Then I'm relieved. I was worried that Yi Guqin from the Sword Sect would threaten your position. Ji Ling breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile. Sword Sect, huh? Interesting. Yan Wushuang said indifferently. She had heard a lot about Yi Guqin recently. Especially when Wan Jianlin had triggered the resonance of 10,000 swords, which had surpassed her by 2 times. This made Yan Wushuang pay some attention to Yi Guqin, but that was it. Why? Could it be that Shuang is interested in Yi Guqin? Ji Ling's words were filled with jealousy. There aren't many men who can catch my eye. Although Yi Guqin is from the Sword Sect, he doesn't have the qualifications. Yan Wushuang said indifferently. I knew there wasn't a man who was worthy of you. Ji Ling giggled and hugged Yan Wushuang from behind. Yan Wushuang faintly frowned. She stood up and walked to the shore. As she came out of the water, her curvaceous body was completely exposed to the air. Under the moonlight, the girl's body was as white as ivory and was suffused with a layer of jade light. The most stunning part was her pair of round and slender legs. The ratio was perfect to the extreme. From the tips of her feet to the curve of her thighs, it was dazzling. I have something to discuss with Uncle Feng. The girl's origin ring flashed. Some clothes wrapped around the girl's perfect body, and she wore a light blue armor made of ice. After wearing the armor, Yan Wushuang lost some of the gentleness of a young girl and gained some valiance. Ji Ling bit her red lips as she watched Yan Wushuang's figure disappear into the distance. Shuang is really like the stars in the sky. Even I can't get close to her. However, this is also good. No man can catch her eye. Ji Ling sighed softly. Ji Ling was one of the few people who could stay by Yan Wushuang's side. She naturally knew how stubborn and proud this girl was on the outside. No man of the same age could conquer her. Chapter 270. The Sword Sect Pagoda stood at the peak of the mountain. Under the moonlight, it exuded an ancient and mysterious aura. Feng Manlu sat alone on the edge of the veranda, holding a pot of wine as he faced the moon formed by the Celestial Emperor's sword. Although he was blind, he looked like he was admiring the moon. Not long after, a young girl in an ice silk skirt armor arrived. Uncle Feng. Yan Wushuang's cold expression melted when she saw Feng Manlu's figure. She revealed her true nature as a young girl with a hint of anxiety. She would only show such an expression in front of someone she approved of. Shuang, your cultivation has improved again. Feng Manlu turned to Yan Wushuang. Yan Wushuang clenched her teeth as she looked at the handsome face that seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life under the moonlight. She said, Uncle Feng, Wushuang has already reached the 9 transformations of the divine soul. I should be able to become your successor. Feng Manlu fell silent. Yan Wushuang continued, Uncle Feng, Shuang, wants to be your successor and go to the peak of the Forbidden Violet Mountain to fight Gu Zun on your behalf. Believe me, Shuang, will definitely win. Feng Manlu sighed as he sensed the girl's stubbornness. You have fought Gu Zun before, but you lost. Shuang has never been weaker than anyone. I can win this time. Yan Wushuang's eyes were filled with stubbornness. She had fought Gu Zun before. Although it was not a life-and-death battle, Yan Wushuang was still at a disadvantage and was suppressed by Gu Zun. However, Yan Wushuang's cultivation had improved greatly this time and she was confident that she could defeat Gu Zun. Feng Manlu had a complicated expression when he heard the girl's words. He shook his head and said, Shuang, my successor has been decided. What? Who is it? Yan Wushuang's face turned pale as she gritted her teeth in disbelief. Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect. Feng Manlu said. Why him? Isn't his Jinqi crippled? If Shuang, can't defeat Gu Zun, does that mean that Yi Guchen has the ability to do so? How could he possibly defeat Gu Zun? Yan Wushuang clenched her fists and pursed her lips tightly. Feng Manlu shook his head and said, Shuang, I know you want to defeat Gu Zun and prove your ability to me. However, the fate of the saber and sword does not lie with you. It lies with the Sword Sect. Shuang has never believed in fate. Only strength can change everything. Can fate help Yi Guchen recover his cultivation? Can fate help him defeat Gu Zun? It can't. Only true strength can defeat Gu Zun, and Shuang has that strength. Yan Wushuang was very stubborn and competitive. She couldn't accept wind-sweeping buildings' decision. Shuang, you have always been arrogant and looked down on other men. However, believe me, Yi Guchen is the best candidate. He will exceed your expectations, Feng Manlu said. Yan Wushuang stared at Feng Manlu with her beautiful eyes. Her face froze as she bit her lips and shouted. Yi Guchen is not worthy. Feng Manlu smiled bitterly and shook his head when he heard the girl's cold and stubborn voice. He felt a headache coming on. However, she was Yan Changge's daughter and Feng Manlu also treated her as his own daughter. Feng Manlu felt helpless at this moment. The girl's eyes were firm as she said stubbornly, Uncle Feng, Shuang, will personally witness Yi Guchen's cultivation in the inner yard ranking battle in 2 months. Moreover, Shuang, will personally defeat him. I hope Uncle Feng will allow Shuang, to replace Yi Guchen at the Forbidden City Summit. Yan Wushuang's beautiful face was filled with stubbornness as she spoke word by word with determination. Shuang, you, sigh, since you are so confident, then so be it. Feng Manlu waved his hand. Okay, then it's a promise. 2 months later, I will definitely defeat Yi Guchen and replace Uncle Feng. After Yan Wushuang finished speaking, she turned around and walked away with her slender legs. Sigh. Feng Manlu sighed. Shuang, you always look down on other men. However, you cannot underestimate Yi Guqin. Although he is temporarily dormant, he is like a dragon hidden in the abyss. In the future, he will definitely soar into the sky. Even I cannot predict his future, let alone you. Feng Manlu shook his head. Only the two of them knew about the conversation that night. Time passed by. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. In these 7 days, Yi Guqin had also refined the 50 spirit pills and the spirit pills he had obtained from the Divine Soul Realm's cave into his body. As he cultivated, Yi Guqin's soul force had also increased dramatically. If it was an ordinary person, they would definitely not be able to refine so many spirit pills in such a short period of time. This was because their mind would not be able to handle it. However, perhaps it was because of his perfect physical body, Yi Guqin was able to absorb the spirit pills without restraint. However, the spirit pills were considered precious pills. Even a purple gold order token disciple could only obtain 50 pills a month. Since there were no more spirit pills, Yi Guqin did not force himself to continue. He also felt that he was about to reach a bottleneck. In his mind, his soul force surged like waves. If it was an ordinary warrior, this soul force would be enough to form 2 or 3 seas of consciousness. I'm really looking forward to it. If I break through to the Divine Soul Realm, what kind of power will I obtain? What will the next tribulation be? Yi Guqin's eyes were filled with anticipation. He already had the heart of a powerhouse. Naturally, he desired to increase his strength. After a few days of closed cultivation, Yi Guqin walked out of his residence. The sky was filled with stars and the moonlight was like water. It was already night. Yi Guqin casually strolled and finally arrived at One Sword Cliff. Looking at the sword mark on the cliff that even time could not erase, Yi Guqin took out an epiphany leaf and placed it in his mouth. Yi Guqin guessed that the origin of this sword mark was the 8th generation sword sect's Tian Xing. If it was an ordinary inner court disciple, they might not be able to comprehend this sword mark. However, Yi Guqin was different. He already had the talent of a sword demon. With the help of the enlightened sword heart and the epiphany leaf, he was able to comprehend this sword mark. At this moment, Yi Guqin's comprehension had almost reached the peak. It could be said that if Yi Guqin was given a spiritual level sword technique, he would only need 10 days to reach the small success stage and a month to reach the greater success stage. Of course, this still required the support of One Sword Cliff's abstruse concept. Subsequently, Yi Guqin took out the meteor's soft sword and began to practice. Perhaps because there was no genuine qi, Yi Guqin's swordsmanship returned to its original nature. With the comprehension of One Sword Cliff's sword mark, Yi Guqin's understanding became more and more. First, he used the boundless heaven sword art. The sword edges overlapped, and the wheel of boundless heaven was displayed. Then, his swordsmanship improved again. The sword edge seemed to cut through the trajectory of the boundless world. Countless trajectories intertwined, forming a sword net that was completely inescapable. The ultimate move of the boundless heaven sword art, inescapable net. Yi Guqin had been meditating for a long time. Finally, he mastered the boundless heaven sword art and comprehended the ultimate move of the spiritual level sword art. If this move was supported by genuine qi, it would be extremely difficult for an expert in the 5th transformation of the Divine Soul Realm to deal with it. After that, Yi Guqin performed the swordsmanship he practiced again. Unsurprisingly, the Taiji swordsmanship was smoothly practiced to the advanced level. It could reflect 100% of the enemy's attack. It was almost watertight. As for the void sword technique, Yi Guqin had already practiced it to the advanced level. At this moment, he improved again and directly stepped into the realm of perfect fusion. Stepping into the realm of perfect fusion, the power of the void sword technique would be multiplied. Then, the shadow kill swordsmanship had also been practiced to the advanced level. At this moment, he also stepped into the realm of perfect fusion. There was also the god-slaying swordsmanship. After the 4th move, 3 roads, Yi Guqin finally practiced the 5th move. As for the last move, Yi Guqin still needed some time to practice and find an opportunity. In the end, except for some scattered swordsmanship, Yi Guqin only had one swordsmanship left. It was also Yi Guqin's biggest trump card and reliance. Supreme Swordsmanship, 10,000 Deities Tribulation. Just as Yi Guqin was about to practice the 10,000 Deities Tribulation, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. I wonder if the grade of the 10,000 Deities Tribulation can leave a sword mark on one sword cliff? Yi Guqin's eyes suddenly blazed. Chapter 271. One Sword Cliff was one of the 3 great places of opportunity in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. It was also the most mysterious. Due to the existence of the ancient sword mark on the precipice, no one else was able to leave a sword mark on it. Even Yan Chang'e and Feng Manlu, who were experts in the way of the sword, could not leave any sword mark on it. It was as if the ancient sword mark was a king with an inviolable majesty. No other sword technique was qualified to leave a mark on it. That was why Yi Guqin was curious. He wondered if the mysterious and powerful 10,000 God Tribulation could leave a sword mark on one sword cliff. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up as he began to display it. Although he didn't have the support of his true chi, the 10,000 God Tribulation's terrifying intent of destroying everything still spread out like a tide, clashing with the abstruse intent of this place. If this scene was seen by others, they would definitely be shocked. This was because the abstruse intent of this place was almost impossible to disturb. This was a sword intent that seemed to have existed since ancient times. However, when Yi Guqin displayed the 10,000 God Tribulation, the terrifying destructive intent of the sword rushed out in all directions. The first move of the 10,000 God Tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. Yi Guqin's sword whistled and the air rapidly compressed as if the power of thousands of sword chi had gathered at one point. Yi Guqin could already display the first move of the 10,000 God Tribulation perfectly. However, because he didn't have the support of his true chi, Yi Guqin couldn't manifest the sword wings on his back, so he couldn't display 10 to 20% of its power. Even so, with the current power of the destruction of heaven and earth, ordinary experts of the first or second transformation of the divine soul realm would be pierced through and die. Boom! Around one sword cliff, there was a small tremor, causing rocks to roll down. Yi Guqin looked over and saw that there was still only one sword mark on one sword cliff. Can't I? Yi Guqin frowned slightly. However, if others were to find out that the swordsmanship he used was capable of shaking the one sword cliff, it would be extremely shocking. Even experts like Feng Manlu and Yan Chang'e could only cause one sword cliff to tremble at most. But one had to know that this was only 1/10 or 2/10 of the 10,000 Deities Tribulation's power. Then let's go again. Yi Guqin wasn't discouraged. He was about to use the second move of the Myriad God Tribulation, Life Fall. Yi Guqin had once used this move in his battle with Gu Xiaoyang. However, with Yi Guqin's current strength, he was still unable to unleash its full power. Even so, the incomplete Life Fall was still more powerful than World Annihilation. Yi Guqin once again attacked with his sword. Even without true chi, the power of this sword strike was still shocking. An incomparably tragic intent realm spread out with a bang. It was as if billions of living beings were lying on the ground, and the ground was covered in blood. Just this horrifying concept of slaughter was enough to make one tremble in fear. The surrounding mysterious sword concept began to boil like boiling water. Rumble. The one sword cliff shook even more violently, and rocks kept rolling down. Yi Guqin glanced over and was surprised to find something. That ancient sword mark seemed to be trembling slowly, faintly glowing. It was as if this sword strike was a threat to its position. However, in the end, the tremors subsided. Yi Guqin still didn't leave a mark on the one sword cliff. Yi Guqin wasn't surprised by this. Even Feng Manlu and the others couldn't leave a sword mark on it. Not to mention Yi Guqin, who didn't even have true chi. If anyone saw him being able to shake the one sword cliff, they would be incomparably shocked. However, Yi Guqin wasn't too concerned about this result. He vaguely guessed that perhaps he hadn't fully unleashed the power of the myriad god tribulation. How could the supreme sword technique recorded in the mysterious Sword of Thunder calamity be ordinary? Yi Guqin shook his head. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He suddenly remembered that he seemed to have a sword move that he hadn't practiced yet. This sword move was the sword move that Yi Guqin created in this world, Pathos of Heaven. There was only one move in the Pathos of Heaven, but it was a sword technique that Yi Guqin had refined from his deepest feelings and feelings. Yi Guqin himself couldn't accurately grade this sword move. After all, this sword move was only one move, and it couldn't even be considered a complete set of sword moves. But no matter what, Yi Guqin still decided to practice it again. He slowly closed his eyes, and the epiphany leaf in his mouth had already melted. At this moment, his mind was extremely clear, like the bright moon in the sky. In his mind, a beautiful voice and smile vaguely appeared. She was happy when she met him. She was sad when she learned that her family had been destroyed. She was heartbroken when she learned that he was the killer who killed her family. That beautiful face with tears on it made Yi Guqin's heart tighten at this moment. Although I, Yi Guqin, don't regret it, I have let you down in my life, Yi Guqin let out a sigh. The sword in his hand struck again. This time, it was very slow and gentle. It was like a lover's hand caressing his cheek. But at the same time, a sorrowful yet beautiful sword concept suddenly spread out. Along with the soul power in Yi Guqin's mind surging and tumbling. For a moment, Yi Guqin himself didn't notice that his soul power had soared again in this sword move, reaching a terrifying level. However, right when the sword light emitted by this gentle sword strike landed on the precipice, a sharp glint appeared on the precipice. Instead, he quietly left a sword mark on the ground. At this moment, there was silence, then, like a volcano that had been accumulating for a long time suddenly erupted, the entire one-sword cliff instantly produced an earth-shattering tremor. This tremor spread out of one-sword cliff and out of the inner courtyard. In the end, the silence of the entire swordsmanship-seeking mountain range was broken. At this moment, the sound of sword whistling filled the sky. A terrifying sword light soared into the sky from one sword cliff as if it wanted to slash into the 9 heavens. It collided with the moon formed by the immemorial sword's celestial emperor. And at the same time, 3 sword lights burst out from the sword mark on one sword cliff, directly rushing towards Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's eyes were filled with surprise, unable to dodge. Because the 3 sword lights were too fast, too strong, too fierce. There was no way to dodge at all. Puff! 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 The 3 sword lights directly escaped into Yi Guqin's body, and at the same time, in Yi Guqin's mind, there was a vicissitude and familiar voice. The junior sequence has passed the test to become the elite sequence. The reward for the test is the 3 sword lights that I have bestowed upon you, a sword light to help you when you are breaking through. A sword light to help you when you are risking your life. A sword light to help you when you are on the brink of life and death. Become the elite sequence, do not disgrace the name of the sword sect. Remember, these words sounded in Yi Guqin's mind. Yi Guqin was not unfamiliar with this voice, it was the voice of the 8th generation sword sect master, Yi Tianqing. Elite sequence, what does that mean? Yi Guqin was puzzled. At this moment, the back of his hand near the web between his thumb and index finger suddenly felt a burning sensation. Then, the green sword-shaped emblem that represented the 9th generation sword sect master appeared. And this green emblem suddenly emitted a golden light, incomparably dazzling in the dark night, like a golden star. Oh no, let's leave first. Yi Guqin's eyelids twitched. He did not want the matter of the 9th generation sword sect master to become an uproar, it was a disaster and not a blessing for him. Yi Guqin's hand covered the sword-shaped emblem that emitted a golden light, and his figure flashed, directly leaving one sword cliff. However, one sword cliff still didn't stop trembling, and it seemed as if it was boiling instead and became even more intense. The entire Sword Whisper mountain range seemed to have been illuminated by that sword light from before. What is it? Why is it trembling? What is that? That sword light is so dazzling, who released it? It came from one sword cliff, what exactly happened there? In the entire forest of sword sect pagodas, no matter if they were resting, in closed-door cultivation, or meditating, all of them were alarmed. At this moment, the entire forest of sword sect pagodas was in an uproar. Chapter 272. Swish. A white-clothed figure flashed to one sword cliff at an extremely fast speed. His figure floated down like a white crane. He had a handsome appearance and an extraordinary bearing. It was Bai Zichen who was ranked second in the inner court. He had been meditating on a mountain near one sword cliff. After hearing the abnormal tremors, he immediately stood up and was the first to come here. His eyes that were as black as an abyss swept one sword cliff and frowned slightly. Because he sensed that the profound sword concept in this place seemed to have suffered some sort of impact, and was disrupted. However, when he approached one sword cliff, he sensed a concept that didn't belong to this place. That concept was filled with poignant beauty, sorrow, love, hate, and so on and so forth. This is, when Bai Zichen's gaze fell on one sword cliff, his pupils suddenly constricted. At this moment, even Bai Zichen, who had always had a calm and composed demeanor, was breathing rapidly as an expression of disbelief appeared in his eyes. His expression that changed rapidly was extremely interesting. Obviously, Bai Zichen was greatly shocked. How is this possible, who is it? Bai Zichen stared fixedly at a slightly thin sword mark beside the simple sword mark. That sword mark didn't show any destructive power, nor did it have a fierce aura. However, it had clearly left behind a mark. A fortuitous encounter, this is a great fortuitous encounter. If I can comprehend it. Bai Zichen forcefully suppressed the shock and joy in his heart. Obviously, the abnormal tremors of one sword cliff just now came from this sword mark. Although he didn't know which senior in the sword Dao had left it behind, it was absolutely a great fortuitous encounter for him. Without the slightest hesitation, Bai Zichen took out his sword and imitated the other sword mark on one sword cliff. He gestured awkwardly in an attempt to comprehend the concept when he drew his sword. However, he wasn't Yi Guchen and didn't have such an experience that was carved into his bones. His actions were no different from imitating a cat to draw a tiger, imitating a handyman. As the tremors of one sword cliff spread throughout the entire sword sect pagoda forest, the sound of wind being torn apart resounded in midair. One sword cliff, it's from one sword cliff. Let's go take a look. Something must have happened. Could it be that something happened to that sword mark? Could it be that someone left a sword mark on one sword cliff? Don't joke around. Even Lord Feng, sect leader Yan and the first elder were unable to leave a sword mark on it. Is there anyone stronger than them in my sword sect pagoda forest? That's true. As more and more figures arrived, more and more people began to gather around one sword cliff. Why do I feel that the sword concept here seems to have changed? It gives off a very sad feeling. I feel it too. I don't know why, but it makes me want to cry, said an inner yard disciple. Suddenly, an inner domain disciple discovered Bai Zichen's figure. That's senior brother Bai Zichen. He's practicing the sword. No. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Am I seeing things? Look at that single sword cliff. Amongst the gathered inner court disciples, one of them looked as if he had seen a ghost as he stared at the sword mark on the solitary sword cliff. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. It's two sword marks. Senior brother Bai Zichen left a sword mark on one sword cliff. The inner court disciple cried out in disbelief. The gazes of all the inner court disciples converged on one sword cliff. Their bodies froze in an instant, as if they had been immobilized by a spell. At the same time, their minds rumbled and their minds shook. All of them opened their mouths wide and were dumbstruck. senior brother Bai Zichen was actually able to leave a mark on one sword cliff. It's unprecedented. An inner court disciple spoke with a trembling voice. On the other hand, Bai Zichen, who was originally comprehending the concept of the sword mark, recovered from his shock. After that, he saw that there were 20 to 30 inner court disciples in the surroundings. All of them had gazes of respect and disbelief as they stared at him. Besides that, there were even more figures, including some elders, who had come after hearing the news. Because the commotion caused by the solitary sword cliff on this night was too great. Bai Zichen was just about to explain. An inner court disciple's eyes were filled with fervor as he said, "Senior brother Bai Zichen, you're actually able to leave a mark on one sword cliff. This is something that even the sect master and the others can't do. Senior brother Bai Zichen is worthy of being the second in the inner court." "What second?" "Senior brother Bai Zichen's strength and talent aren't much weaker than senior sister Yan Wushuang." More and more people gathered in the surroundings. In the end, even Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, and the others arrived. When they heard that Bai Zichen had left a mark on one sword cliff, all of them were shocked. If it was someone else, even if they were seen, they might not be so certain. However, Bai Zichen was different. Just like Yan Wushuang, he had always been cultivating in seclusion and seemed very mysterious. Moreover, his strength and cultivation were extraordinary, and his reputation in the inner court wasn't much weaker than Yan Wushuang's. There were even rumors that if Bai Zichen was willing, he had the strength to fight for the first in the inner court. Coupled with Bai Zichen's extraordinary aura and the fact that he just so happened to be swinging his sword here, it was very difficult for others not to feel that he was the one who left the sword mark. It was just like the poignant and sorrowful sword concept was very similar to Bai Zichen's indifferent and mysterious aura. So many people were looking at him with gazes of burning adoration. Even if it was Bai Zichen who'd always been indifferent, it was impossible for waves to not arise in his heart. He opened his mouth, yet the words hadn't left his mouth when it turned into silence. In the eyes of all the inner court disciples, this silence was obviously tacit agreement. Swish! Another two flowing lights flashed over from nearby. Under the glow of the moon, two beautiful young women were like celestial maidens in the mortal world, and they drew the gazes of everyone. One of them was a beautiful young woman in green clothes. The other was a beautiful young woman in a dress made of ice and had a pair of shockingly round and long legs. Shockingly, it was Ji Ling and Yan Wushuang. It's senior sister Ji Ling and senior sister Yan Wushuang. Senior sister Yan Wushuang, I've finally seen what she looks like. She's actually so beautiful. Even if it was amongst the inner court disciples, there were still some that hadn't seen Yan Wushuang. At this moment, when they saw her, they were instantly shocked by her beauty, and a wisp of shock surged into their eyes. Bai Zichen gazed at Yan Wushuang while a trace of hidden adoration flashed in the depths of his eyes. This. Yan Wushuang's beautiful eyes were fixed on one sword cliff. When she saw the sword mark, her delicate and beautiful face that had always been indifferent changed slightly, and a look of disbelief flashed in her jet-black eyes. Bai Zichen, did you leave that sword mark behind? Yan Wushuang's tone was slightly bitter. In the inner court, even Wang Xiaotian, who was ranked third, wasn't a match for Yan Wushuang. Bai Zichen was the only one who had the strength to compete with her. Therefore, Yan Wushuang subconsciously thought that the sword mark was left behind by Bai Zichen. It wasn't that she hadn't thought of other people, but no matter how she thought about it in the inner court, she couldn't find a more suitable candidate than Bai Zichen. As for Yi Guqin, a person whose vital energy had been crippled, he had never appeared in Yan Wushuang's mind at all. It was as if Yi Guqin didn't exist in the inner court. Bai Zichen pursed his somewhat dry lips, and he forcefully suppressed the passion hidden deep in his eyes. It was the first time he saw such a surprised expression on Yan Wushuang's face. Therefore, he couldn't speak the truth anymore. However, Bai Zichen didn't admit it either. He only turned his back to one sword cliff, and fell into deep thought as he looked at the sword mark. He didn't personally admit that he had left the sword mark behind. However, this action undoubtedly silently indicated that he was the one who had left the sword mark behind. This sword concept. Yan Wushuang slowly closed her beautiful eyes. Her mind seemed to have conjured up a beautiful love story. The bitterness in the young swordsman's heart, and the struggle in the face of the sword and love. He didn't want to go against his sword heart. However, he also didn't want to let down that infatuated woman. In the end, he still let her down. After closing her eyes and savoring it for a long time, Yan Wushuang opened her beautiful eyes. A teardrop fell from the corner of her eye. It was hard to imagine that although Yan Wushuang was a woman, she had a cold and indifferent personality, and almost never shed tears. However, at this moment, tears really fell from her eyes. When she wiped them with her jade-like hands, she still seemed to find it unbelievable. It wasn't just Yan Wushuang, even Ji Ling and some sensitive female disciples were affected by this sword concept, and they couldn't help but shed tears. This sword strike is so sorrowful, so senior brother Bai Zichen is usually calm and silent, but his heart is suffering so much? Exactly what kind of past did he have? At this moment, all the female disciples in the inner court looked at Bai Zichen as if they were looking at the god in their hearts. They wished that they could sacrifice themselves to protect his sorrowful heart. Even Yan Wushuang's expression carried a trace of emotion. She admitted that she was moved by this sword strike. Chapter 273. The night in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was destined to not be peaceful. In the end, not only were the inner court disciples alarmed, but even Qing Yi, Gu Tuo, Shi Yun, and the other inner court elders came to One Sword Cliff. When they saw the second sword mark on One Sword Cliff, they were no less shocked than the inner court disciples. When they heard that the sword mark was left by Bai Zichen, their eyes lit up. It was as if they had discovered a treasure. Some elders were even curious and wanted to ask about the details. However, Bai Zichen's expression remained calm and he remained silent. If it was any other time, it would be disrespectful to face an elder with such an attitude. However, at this moment, everyone thought that the sword mark was left by Bai Zichen. Even the elders had no complaints. Gu Tuo waved his hand and shouted, "Everyone, please disperse. Don't disturb your first senior brother from comprehending the sword." How can Bai Zichen comprehend in peace with so many people here? Bai Zichen was a member of the First Elders faction. As an elder of the First Elders faction, he naturally had to protect his own disciple. Even Lord Feng couldn't leave a sword mark on One Sword Cliff. Could it be left by Bai Zichen? Although Elder Qing he was surprised, he was also suspicious. Why? Are you jealous of a genius? One Sword Cliff looks at opportunities and comprehension, not just strength. Gu Tuo's words carried a hint of sarcasm. His tone changed with a hint of mockery as he said, "Or do you think that Bai Zichen isn't qualified to leave a sword mark on One Sword Cliff and that Yi Guchen, who has lost all his true energy, can leave a sword mark?" Ha! Gu Tuo sneered when he said that. He wasn't the only one who laughed. Even some of the inner court disciples who disliked Yi Guchen mocked him. If Yi Guchen, who has lost all his true energy, can leave a sword mark, then so can I. Ting Jingshan sneered in the crowd. Ha, senior brother Teng is right. Some of the inner court disciples laughed in agreement. Some of the inner academy disciples were fearless. The various miracles that Yi Guchen had created caused them to feel great pressure. At this moment, the miracle that Bai Zichen had created had also caused Yi Guchen's reputation to be greatly diluted. Humph, this old man never said that Yi Guchen could leave a sword scar. Elder Qing he waved his sleeves angrily. Although he thought highly of Yi Guchen, he did not think that Yi Guchen could leave a mark on One Sword Cliff. At this moment, Bai Zichen, who was in the middle of the crowd's discussion, appeared calm on the surface. However, there was a trace of unease in his heart. Who was it? Which senior left this sword scar? However, he probably won't blame me. After all, I didn't personally admit that I left it behind. Everything is just a misunderstanding between them. As long as I can get Yan Wushuang's favor, this risk is worth it. Bai Zichen was struggling in his heart. He gritted his teeth and turned to look at Yan Wushuang. Yan Wushuang's expression changed slightly. When her beautiful eyes looked at him, the usual indifference and alienation seemed to have lessened a little. Instead, it was replaced by curiosity. One had to know that Yan Wushuang was extremely proud. Other than her father, Yan Changge, and Feng Manlu, there was almost no other man who could make her expression so rich. Bai Zichen suppressed the excitement in his heart. He felt that this risk was worth it. Yan Wushuang walked over with her fair, round, and beautiful legs. She looked at Bai Zichen with a slightly complicated gaze. Bai Zichen, I originally thought that your strength was only enough to challenge me. However, this sword strike made me understand that your strength is enough to threaten me. I look forward to fighting with you in the inner yard ranking battle. Yan Wushuang's beautiful face lost a trace of indifference. After she finished speaking, the corners of her mouth curled up into an extremely faint arc. However, it was this faint smile that completely made Bai Zichen lose his mind. Such a gentle tone and such a smile could only be experienced by those who had obtained Yan Wushuang's approval. Yan Wushuang's special attitude towards him was all because of that poignant sword scar. Yan Wushuang drifted away. Bai Zichen's expression was still a little dazed. A trace of infatuation appeared in his eyes. After that, under Gu Tuo's driving, the elders and inner yard disciples finally dispersed amidst discussions. However, it was very obvious that the matter of one sword cliff would continue for a very long time. In less than a day, the entire sword sect tower forest would know of Bai Zichen's miracle of leaving a scar on one sword cliff. However, at this moment, the person who had truly left a sword scar on one sword cliff and created a miracle was hiding in his residence on peak number 5 and sizing up the sequence emblem on the back of his hand. The green sword-shaped emblem had unknowingly turned gold. It was as if it was gilded. I never expected one sword cliff to be a test left behind by Yi Tianxing. However, what does the elite sequence mean? What's the special meaning of this golden emblem? Yi Guqin was very puzzled. He could not figure out the grand scheme of the sword sect and the 8th generation sword master, Yi Tianxing. After an hour, the golden sword-shaped emblem finally dissipated its light and hid under his skin. My strength has not reached that level yet. I'll put this matter aside for now. I've gained a lot from one sword cliff this time. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed with joy. Not only had his various sword skills improved, but his sword skills had also improved. More surprisingly, he had left a scar on one sword cliff with the pathos of heaven. Putting aside the so-called elite sequence, just the 3 sword lights that Yi Tianxing had given him were a great harvest. However, Yi Guqin did not find any trace of the 3 sword lights after looking into his body. However, he was certain that the 3 sword lights would be of great use at a critical moment after entering his body. Not only that, but there was also an unexpected surprise. Yi Guqin discovered that his already vigorous soul power had once again skyrocketed to a terrifying level. Yi Guqin tried to figure it out. Perhaps it was because the pathos of heaven technique required the coordination of soul power to emit that desolate sword concept in order to unleash its greatest power. All in all, Yi Guqin's foundation had risen again. If he broke through to the divine soul realm, his strength would increase exponentially. In the following period of time, the entire sword sect pagoda forest was constantly discussing the matter of Bai Zichen leaving a scar on one sword cliff. However, regardless of whether it was the outer yard or the inner yard disciples, they all used a respectful tone to talk about Bai Zichen. As for Yi Guqin, he had been cultivating by himself in his residence to harmonize his surging soul power. Therefore, among the disciples of the sword sect pagoda forest, the number of people who talked about Yi Guqin gradually decreased. Bai Zichen replaced Yi Guqin and became the role model in the hearts of some people. Of course, Yi Guqin's influence could not be worn down in a short period of time. However, Compared to before, Yi Guqin's reputation had been suppressed by Bai Zichen by a lot. However, Yi Guqin did not care about all of this. What he cared about was only his sword and his own strength. He did not care about the rest of the empty reputation. Moreover, due to his closed-door cultivation, Yi Guqin did not know about the storm outside. As time passed, the date of the opening of the Void Sword Realm was finally approaching. Chapter 274. On this day, Yi Guqin, who was sitting cross-legged in his residence, slowly opened his eyes. After a night of cultivation, he didn't look tired at all. Instead, he was in high spirits. His black eyes were as bright as the stars. Obviously, the surge of soul power made Yi Guqin's spirit much better. His foundation for breaking through to the divine soul realm was also stronger. It's time. Yi Guqin slowly got up. Today was the day to go to the Void Sword Realm. And Yi Guqin's only hope of tearing the seal of his Qi Si and breaking through to the next realm existed in the Void Sword Realm. If I succeed, the wind and clouds will transform into a dragon. If I fail, I will fall forever. Yi Guqin's eyes were firm and tenacious. He had the heart of an expert and didn't think that he would fail. What he needed was only opportunity and time. Yi Guqin opened the door and saw a beautiful figure dressed in green standing outside. She seemed to have been waiting for Yi Guqin. It was Mu Xingzu. "Senior brother Yi, you finally came out," Mu Xingzu said, but her eyes were a little erratic, as if she was thinking about something. "Should I tell senior brother Yi the news that senior brother Bai Zichen left a mark on One Sword Cliff? Will he feel hurt?" Mu Xingzu thought to herself. She thought a lot because Yi Guqin had created many miracles after entering the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. In Mu Xingzu's mind, Bai Zichen left a mark on One Sword Cliff, which undoubtedly broke Yi Guqin's miracles. Therefore, she was very hesitant and didn't know whether to tell Yi Guqin the news. "What's wrong with you?" Yi Guqin asked when he saw Mu Xingzu's erratic expression. "No, nothing." Mu Xingzu waved her hand. Sigh. "I better not tell senior brother Yi. If senior brother Yi could use his Zhenqi, he would definitely be able to leave a mark on One Sword Cliff." Mu Xingzu thought. Then, Yi Guqin sent a message to the Divine Condor. Soon, the Divine Condor flapped its wings and flew over. "Brother Condor, you've been in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest for so long. Why don't you go out and relax?" Yi Guqin said with a faint smile. "Quack, quack, that's good. Grandpa Condor is tired of staying here. I want to go out and have some fun," the Divine Condor quacked. 2 people and 1 eagle left the number 5 peak. Although there were many opportunities in the Void Sword Realm, there were also many dangers. Therefore, generally speaking, only the elite disciples of the 7 great powers had the qualifications to go there. At this moment, on a square in the inner court, there was a flying boat that could accommodate more than 100 people. The body of the flying boat was faintly glowing with the light of countless spirit inscription formations. This flying boat could also be considered as a mystical rune divine weapon, but it was used for transportation. Moreover, it was extremely expensive to make. Even with the foundation of the 7 great powers, each of them only had 1 or 2 flying boats like this. On the square, there was a dense crowd gathered. They were all the disciples and elders of the inner court. Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, Yuan Mia and other elite disciples of the inner court had been waiting here for a long time. In addition, Wang Xiaotian had also arrived. Ever since that tragic incident, Wang Xiaotian had been recuperating in seclusion. Every time he thought of that kind of humiliation, Wang Xiaotian wanted to roar to the sky and tear Yi Guqin and the Divine Condor apart. Especially now, there were some hidden and playful gazes around him, glancing at him from time to time. This caused Wang Xiaotian's heart to be filled with grief and anger. However, Wang Xiaotian was very afraid of Yi Guqin's blood cloud puppet, so he suppressed the murderous intent in his heart. Yi Guqin, if I seize the opportunity in the Void Sword Realm this time, I'll make your death a luxury. Wang Xiaotian's expression was cold and ruthless. Although there were many opportunities in the Void Sword Realm, there were also dangers everywhere. What Wang Xiaotian was waiting for was the moment when Yi Guqin was in danger. Suddenly, an otherworldly figure in white arrived. His temperament was calm, indifferent, and unhurried. It's senior brother Bai Zichen. Senior brother Bai Zichen is here. Bai Zichen's arrival caused an uproar in the inner court. The news of One Sword Cliff had spread like wildfire in the inner and outer courts these days. Surrounded by many respectful gazes, even with Bai Zichen's indifferent temperament, he could not help but reveal a faint smile. Bai Zichen, this time in the Void Sword Realm, you have to do your best, look for opportunities, and strive to go further. You have to defeat Yan Wushuang and win first place in the inner court. You have to fight for the first elder. Gu Tuo stepped forward and whispered to Bai Zichen. Elder, don't worry. Of course. Bai Zichen nodded with a faint smile. He also understood that if he wanted to conquer Yan Wushuang, it was not enough to rely on the reputation of leaving a scar on One Sword Cliff. He had to truly defeat Yan Wushuang in order to conquer her heart. The senior who left a scar on One Sword Cliff has a profound understanding of the sword. Even with my talent, I can only comprehend 10 to 20%. But it doesn't matter. As long as I can comprehend 30% of that sword scar, I have the confidence to defeat Yan Wushuang and completely win her heart. Bai Zichen said firmly in his heart. The two senior sisters are here. At this moment, another exclamation sounded. Not far away, Ji Ling and Yan Wushuang flew over. Ji Ling was already eye-catching enough. Her beauty was brilliant, but beside Yan Wushuang, she was willing to be a green leaf to set off Yan Wushuang. Many inner court disciples looked at Yan Wushuang with uncontrollable surprise and longing in their eyes. When a beautiful appearance and powerful strength were combined into one, such a woman was the most attractive to men and the most desirable to conquer. However, many inner court disciples also knew that Yan Wushuang was a star that they would never be able to touch in their lifetime. Shuang, are you really not going to the Void Sword Realm? Ji Ling held Yan Wushuang's hand and said in a disappointed tone. I have already been to the Void Sword Realm twice. It is useless to go again. What I need now is a breakthrough on the line between life and death. Yan Wushuang said indifferently. All right then. Ji Ling curled her lips. Yan Wushuang's eyes turned and fell on Bai Zichen. Bai Zichen's heart suddenly jumped, but he did not show it on his face. I am looking forward to seeing what kind of strength you will have when you return this time. I hope you will not disappoint me. Although Yan Wushuang's tone was also very indifferent, it was obvious that she looked at him in a new light. This scene caused jealousy to erupt in the hearts of many inner academy disciples. However, they also knew that Bai Zichen had moved Yan Wushuang because of the sword scar on One Sword Cliff. It seems that senior sister Yan Wushuang is senior brother Bai Zichen's. Some inner court disciples sighed in their hearts. They felt that Yan Wushuang was about to be taken. However, just as the atmosphere between Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen was harmonious, an untimely noisy voice suddenly sounded. Wow, long-legged girl, your legs are so long and so white. I can lick them for a year. Who was it? All the inner court disciples, including some elders, were stunned. Which blind guy dared to say such arrogant words and flirt with the goddess in the hearts of the inner court disciples? Bai Zichen's eyes suddenly darkened. Originally, the atmosphere between him and Yan Wushuang was quite good, but it was ruined by this sentence. Not far away, Yi Guqin, Mu Xingzu, and the Divine Eagle walked over. It is Yi Jianzong. Everyone looked over. Yan Wushuang's eyes turned and collided with Yi Guqin's eyes. Chapter 275. Their gazes met in the void. Although Yan Wushuang was a young girl, her eyes were sharp, like an unsheathed sword, with a sharpness that made it difficult for people to look at her directly. Yi Guchen's eyes were as calm as an ancient well. Facing Yan Wushuang's questioning and provocative gaze, Yi Guchen looked at her indifferently. Is she Yan Wushuang, the top student of the inner yard? Yi Guchen looked at Yan Wushuang. He had heard of Yan Wushuang's name before coming to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, but it was the first time he saw her after such a long time. Yan Wushuang could become one of the geniuses who left her name on the swordsmanship-seeking tablet, which meant that her talent in sword principle could not be underestimated. It had to be said that even with Yi Guchen's calm state of mind, when he saw Yan Wushuang for the first time, he had a trace of admiration in his heart. This young girl was indeed very attractive. Whether it was her cold temperament that did not match her delicate face or her pair of stunning slender legs, without exception, they made the man's heart itch. However, Yi Guchen was not that kind of person, so he just glanced at her indifferently and then looked away. Yi Guchen, please take care of your mount. Although Bai Zichen wanted to pull out the divine eagle's tendons and bones and roast it on the fire, he still looked calm on the surface. What? Boy, what did you say? Say it again. The divine eagle's feathers stood up, and its eyes were sharp. I said. Bai Zichen was about to speak when a kind disciple came forward and whispered in his ear. Bai Zichen's body trembled slightly, and he glanced at Wang Xiaotian, who was not far away with a gloomy face. His indifferent expression was slightly stiff, but he did not say anything in the end. Obviously, the tragic things that the divine eagle had done to Wang Xiaotian had spread throughout the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Moreover, Yan Wushuang was here, so Bai Zichen did not want any accidents to happen. Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect, I've heard of your name for a long time. It's a pleasure to meet you today. I've also heard of all the miracles you've created in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. I have to say, it's surprising and admirable, but... Yan Wushuang's voice was indifferent, and she paused. Yi Guchen frowned slightly. He could sense a trace of doubt and hostility in Yan Wushuang's words. People have to face reality, don't they? Glory only belongs to the past. The current you, to be honest, is very weak. Yan Wushuang's appearance was exquisite and pleasing to the heart. However, the words that came out of her mouth were incomparably cold and somewhat ear-piercing. This Yi Guchen has never met you before, nor do we have any enmity between us. I wonder what the meaning of your words is. There was a trace of indifference on Yi Guchen's face. Others saw Yan Wushuang as a goddess and had a longing for her. However, Yi Guchen did not. Do you still not understand what I'm talking about? Or could it be that you think you're like Bai Zichen and possess the comprehension ability and strength to leave behind a sword mark on solitary sword cliff? Yan Wushuang's fine eyelashes raised as she spoke indifferently. Yi Guchen looked at Bai Zichen with a strange expression. Seeing this, the corners of Bai Zichen's mouth curled up into a faint smile, and his chest unconsciously straightened a little. What's going on? Yi Guchen was puzzled. Yi Guchen, are you still playing dumb? Could it be that you don't know that Bai Zichen left behind a sword mark on solitary sword cliff? Not far away, Gu Tua seemed to have seized an opportunity to take revenge, and he sneered. He left a mark on solitary sword cliff? Yi Guchen's eyes revealed a trace of surprise, and he instantly understood. At the side, Mu Xingzu twisted her fingers and said timidly, Sorry, Senior Brother Yi. I should have told you this news earlier, but Xingzhu was afraid that Senior Brother Yi would mind this kind of thing, so I didn't say anything. Ah. I see. Yi Guchen wasn't stupid, and he instantly understood the cause and effect. This was merely a play of substituting one for another. He looked at Bai Zichen and said indifferently, Bai Zichen, are you sure it was you who left behind a sword mark on solitary sword cliff? Yi Guchen's gaze was extremely deep. Although Bai Zichen's expression remained calm, his heart was beating like a drum. Why does Yi Guchen look as if he has seen through it? Could it be that he was hiding in the dark and saw it? No, that's impossible. No one will believe him. Bai Zichen thought about many things in his heart. He didn't say yes or no, and only remained silent. And this silence, in the eyes of outsiders, made Bai Zichen even more mysterious and profound, as if he didn't care about Yi Guchen's doubts. Yi Guchen, can I interpret your words as jealousy? Ting Jingshan walked out and mocked. Yi Guchen, if you can't accept this reality, then I'm really disappointed. Yan Wushuang shook her head slightly. She originally thought that although Yi Guchen's true qi was crippled, he should be a straightforward person. But now, in her eyes, Yi Guchen had become a person who was jealous of Bai Zichen. Yi Guchen smiled and shook his head, but he didn't explain anything. Firstly, as a sword sect and sword demon, his pride made him disdain to explain anything. Secondly, with his true qi crippled cultivation, if he said that he was the one who left the sword scar, it would only lead to more ridicule from outsiders. As for the pathos of heaven, if he wanted to display its true power, he could only wait until his qi sea was unsealed and he broke through to the divine soul realm. Therefore, as long as Yi Guchen had a breakthrough in this trip to the Void Sword realm, all the truth would naturally be revealed. Seeing Yi Guchen shaking his head and smiling without saying anything, the disappointment in Yan Wushuang's eyes became even more obvious. In her opinion, this was tantamount to avoidance and speechlessness. Uncle Feng, is this the successor you have chosen? It's really despicable. Yan Wushuang sighed in her heart. She spoke again, Yi Guchen, I, Yan Wushuang, only have one thing to tell you: people should know their own limits. What do you mean? Yi Guchen put his hands behind his back and was incomparably calm. You should know what it means in your heart. If you don't have the ability, the top of the Forbidden City will undoubtedly disgrace Uncle Feng. Yan Wushuang's tone was cold. She turned around and strode away with her slender legs. Looking at Yan Wushuang's slender back, Yi Guchen couldn't help but feel amused and said, Yan Wushuang, then I'll also tell you that in the inner yard ranking battle a month later, I'll return what you said intact. Yi Guchen flicked his sleeves and his eyes were cold. I, Yan Wushuang, will wait. Yan Wushuang didn't look back and left directly. Many inner yard disciples were a little confused when they heard the conversation between the two. However, there were also some elders and disciples who knew the inside story. When they heard the words, top of the Forbidden City, their pupils suddenly shrank. They looked at Yi Guchen one by one, revealing a look of surprise and uncertainty. Could it be that the successor chosen by Master Feng is Elder Qing? He was surprised. After a brief interlude, some of the inner yard disciples who were going to participate in the Void Sword realm had also gathered. Under the lead of Elder Qing He and Elder Gu Tua, they all boarded the airship. The spiritual inscriptions on the surface of the airship bloomed with light. The entire airship floated in the air and flew into the distance. Yi Guchen stood on the deck of the airship with his hands behind his back and his eyes looking into the distance. He could feel that Ji Ling, Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, Yuan Mia, and the others were all secretly looking at him. Most of them were playful, hostile, mocking, and indifferent. Many of the inner yard disciples were the same. It seems that I must make a breakthrough in this trip to the Void Sword realm. As long as I can make a breakthrough, any problem can be solved. Whether it's the bet with the first elder or the scar on the one sword cliff, if I can recover my strength, I, Yi Guchen, of the sword sect, fear nothing. Chapter 276. After the elite meeting of the 10 prefectures, the Saint Origin dynasty fell into silence. However, this silence had been broken recently. As the space around the floating mountain trembled more violently, everyone knew that the Void Sword realm, the most famous place in the Saint Origin dynasty, was about to open. All the super families and forces in the various prefectures were envious of this place. However, they were helpless as they knew that the Void Sword realm had already been controlled by the 7 major forces. Only the elite disciples of the 7 major forces were qualified to enter. Just as Yiguchen and the rest left the Sword Whisper mountain range, the other 6 major forces also made their moves. In the northern region of the Saint Origin dynasty, there was a towering pitch-black steel city that was built in the middle of a desolate mountain range. The steel city looked ferocious and majestic as it emitted a domineering aura. This steel city was the base of one of the 7 major forces, the Saber-Sealing Monarch Palace. At this moment, there were many disciples of the Saber-Sealing Monarch Palace gathered in front of a pitch-black cave. The leader of the disciples was a red-clothed man with a devilishly handsome face. Although he was from the human race, he emitted traces of demonic aura. The disciples of the Saber-Sealing Monarch Palace didn't dare to get too close to the devilishly handsome young man. Not long after, a powerful aura emitted from the pitch-black cave. Oh, the Divine Soul 6th transformation. Not bad. The devilishly handsome red-clothed young man curled his lips into an evil smile. A black-clothed young man slowly walked out of the pitch-black cave. He had a head of messy gray hair and a scar across the left side of his face. The most eye-catching part was his left sleeve. It was empty and it was obvious that he had lost an arm. He held a blood-red saber in his right hand and the name of the saber was Sword Burial. If Yiguchen was here, he definitely wouldn't be unfamiliar with this person. This was because this gray-haired young man was the one that Yiguchen had used the universal sacred sword to cut off his left arm at the Sword Whisper Steel. He was Blood Saber, Mo Juechen, who was ranked 5th on the Heavenly Saber list. After Yiguchen had cut off his arm, Mo Juechen had entered an even crazier cultivation. He had even entered the life and death cave that most disciples of the Saber-Sealing Monarch Palace feared. Mo Juechen's cultivation had only been able to soar to the 6 transformations of the Divine Soul through such desperate training. Mo Juechen looked coldly at the devilishly handsome young man and asked, "The Void Sword Realm has opened?" "Soon. That's why I'm waiting for you here." Facing Mo Juechen, the demonic youth's expression remained calm and casual. "Will the sword sect go?" Mo Juechen asked again. "Is the devilishly handsome Monarch Palace, the devilishly handsome young Monarch Palace, the devilishly handsome young man. Monarch 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 Palace Monarch Monarch Palace Monarch, Monarch Monarch Monarch. TSK, TSK. What a pitiful sword sect. Not only was your true chi crippled, you even encountered a madman like Mo Juechen." The demonic youth revealed a gloating smile. But in the next moment, his smile vanished as he muttered to himself, "I wonder if Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, and the other freaks will go to the Void Sword domain. Only Gu Zun can deal with those guys." But Gu Zun has been in closed-door training for a whole year, and he doesn't even plan to participate in the Void Sword realm. What kind of unique skill is he comprehending, and what is he preparing to do? The demonic young man was puzzled. In the Sealing Blade Monarch Hall, there was almost no one in the same generation who could subdue him. Only Gu Zun could make the demonic youth admit defeat. On this day, the battle intent of the saber-conferred King's Hall surged as a group of elite disciples set out. Among them were the demonic young man, Mo Juechen, and the other top 10 geniuses on the Heavenly Saber list. On the other side, in the western part of the Saint Origin dynasty, there was a majestic city called Limitless City. It was located in the middle of the Heavenly Spirit Mountain Range. It was a treasured place for cultivation and was filled with abundant spiritual chi. On one of the peaks, there was a young man in a black and white robe with his hands behind his back. He had long black and white hair that fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were pitch black and deep. He was like an ancient well that had no ripples. No one could see through him. He carried 2 swords on his back, one black and one white, one yin and one yang. Behind the young man stood a man in the robe of the Limitless Sword sect. If Yi Xia was here, he would definitely recognize that the man was Xian Mo of the Sun Moon Hall. "Is what you said true?" the black and white-haired young man asked. "Senior brother Xian Hao, it's true. There is definitely a heavenly lightning in the lightning tide area." Xian Mo bowed with his hands cupped together. He was extremely respectful to the young man before him. The black and white-haired young man was Xian Hao, the prime genius of the Sun Moon Hall of the Limitless Sword Sect. Very well. If Yan Wushuang and Gu Zun don't come to the Void Sword domain, no one can stop me. I must obtain the heavenly lightning and that sword skill. Xian Hao's tone was indifferent. In the next moment, he stepped out of the mountain. It should be known that this was a 1,000 feet tall mountain. Before one's cultivation reached the life and death threshold and possessed wings of true qi, even an expert in the 9 changes of the divine soul realm would fall to his death. However, after Xian Hao stepped out, the space around him trembled slightly. His figure appeared a few hundred feet below as though he had teleported. After a few flashes, he had left the mountain. This made Xian Mo dumbfounded. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. As expected of senior brother Xian Hao. Only senior brother Xian Hao can comprehend such a peerless void sword intent. Not only that, he also has. Xian Mo's eyes were filled with envy and jealousy at the thought of this. However, he also knew that although he was also a disciple of the Sun Moon Hall, his talent and strength were far inferior to Xian Hao's. It was like a firefly compared to the bright moon. As the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, Sealed Saber Royal Hall, and Limitless Sword Sect moved out one after another, the other forces did not lag behind and sent out their best disciples. One could imagine that the trip to the Void Sword domain of the floating mountain would be a gathering of elites and the most intense battles would unfold. It was also the time for the 7 major forces to show their abilities and compete with each other. On the airship belonging to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, Yi Guqin stood at the side of the ship, accompanied by Mu Xingzu. As for the Divine Eagle, it had flown off somewhere. Brother Yi. Among the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, Chu Qingqi and Yi Xia walked over. What's the matter? Yi Guqin asked. I'm here to tell Brother Yi about some must-visit places in the Void Sword domain. If possible, we can join forces to prevent others from taking advantage of the situation, Chu Qingqi said in a low voice. Yi Xia also nodded slightly, apparently acknowledging Yi Guqin's ability. Oh, I'd like to hear more. Yi Guqin was a little interested. Although there are still many opportunities in the Void Sword domain that have not been discovered, there are also some places where opportunities have been discovered long ago. However, due to various reasons, it is impossible for all of them to be taken away. Over time, these places have become fixed treasure places. In the Void Sword domain, there are 3 fixed treasure places. One is the Sword Pavilion, which is the place where the Void Sword sect collected swordsmanship cultivation methods in ancient times. For example, the Void Sword technique that you took from Xianing was brought out from the Sword Pavilion by the disciples of the Limitless Sword sect, Chu Qingqi said. So there is such a thing. Yi Guqin suddenly realized. Void Sword sect, Void Sword technique. Just from the names, one could tell that there was some connection. In addition, there are also the Elixir Hall and the Fortune Golden Pool. They are must-visit places of opportunities. When Chu Qingqi mentioned these places of opportunities, there was obviously a trace of enthusiasm. Hearing this, Yi Guqin's heart also moved. No wonder the Void Sword domain was so famous. Putting aside the undiscovered opportunities, just these 3 places were enough to attract people's attention. After another day of flying, Yi Guqin finally saw it. At the end of the distant skyline, there was a city built with huge stones. Further away from the huge stone city, a towering mountain could be faintly seen, as if it was suspended in the void. The lower half of the mountain was completely submerged in the misty clouds. Brother Yi, we've arrived at the 100 Break City, Chu Qingqi said with a faint smile. Chapter 277. The 100 Break City was the closest city to the floating mountain. It was also because of the Void Sword realm that this city was formed. Brother Yi, the people from the 7 major forces will stay in the 100 Break City for the time being. The floating mountain's void sword realm will open in a few days, Chu Qingqi explained. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. He looked at the distant towering mountain peak in the sky and could vaguely feel that the surrounding space seemed to be shaking and distorting. The airship of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest stopped outside the 100 Break City. Yi Guqin and the others also got off the airship and entered the 100 Break City. Because the Void Sword Realm was about to open, the 100 Break City was also surging with people and bustling with noise and excitement. Although the city was a little shabby, it did not affect its popularity at all. Under the arrangement of Elder Gu Tua and Elder Qing He, the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest also booked an entire inn. Yi Guqin sat cross-legged in his room and meditated. He was ready to quietly wait for the Void Sword Realm to open. At this moment, Mu Xingzu's crisp voice came from outside the door, "Senior Brother Yi, come in." Yi Guqin opened his eyes. Mu Xingzu walked in and looked at Yi Guqin. Her face was slightly red as she said, "Senior Brother Yi, you've been cultivating all this time. Do you want to relax? For example, go shopping or something?" Mu Xingzu's voice became softer and softer as she spoke. Yi Guqin's temperament had always been cold and indifferent. It took Mu Xingzu a lot of courage to speak. Yi Guqin was slightly taken aback. There was a faint smile in his dark eyes. Mu Xingzhu hurriedly said, "Xingzhu saw that senior brother was under a lot of pressure, so I wanted senior brother to relax a little. Moreover, there are many things that have been leaked from the Void Sword Realm in the 100 Break City." "Oh, is that so? Then let's go shopping." Yi Guqin stood up and smiled faintly. Mu Xingzu's beautiful face revealed a happy smile. The reason why Broken City could become a city was not only because it was close to the Void Sword Realm, but also because many disciples of the 7 major forces who came out of the Void Sword Realm would bring out many strange things. Some of these things were treasures, while others were trash. Therefore, over time, the 100 Broken City market was formed to trade all kinds of things that flowed out of the Void Sword Realm. Senior Brother Yi, Xingzhu once heard that someone had found a top-grade mystical rune weapon from the market. Along the way, Mu Xingzu said excitedly. It was obvious that after defeating Qin Lin, Mu Xingzu's suppressed naivety was revealed. "What do you like? Go and see for yourself." Yi Guqin smiled and waved his hand. Shopping was a natural instinct that no girl could avoid. Mu Xingzu blushed and nodded. Then, she ran to each stall. Yi Guqin was also interested in the market. He looked at each stall. Suddenly, when he walked past one of the stalls, his sharp soul perception suddenly detected a trace of a strange fluctuation. Although the fluctuation was very subtle, Yi Guqin caught it. He glanced over and saw that there were a lot of things placed on the stall. What made Yi Guqin feel the fluctuation was a black broken wooden tablet. The word "one" was engraved on the wooden tablet. Yi Guqin's expression darkened and he walked to the stall. The stall owner was a middle-aged man who looked quite shrewd. When he saw Yi Guqin, his eyes lit up. Yi Guqin did not point out that he wanted the wooden tablet. Instead, he pointed at the 4 or 5 odds and ends around the wooden tablet and asked, "How many crystal jades are there in total?" "Oh, you really have sharp eyes. These treasures are the treasures that the elite disciples of the 7 major forces risked their lives to bring out from the Void Sword Realm. Each and every one of them is precious." The stall owner was eloquent and his words were soul-stirring. "Just say it. How many crystal jades?" Yi Guqin said lightly. "Not much, not much. 200,000 crystal jades." The stall owner's eyes flashed and he said with a smile. 200,000. Yi Guqin's eyes narrowed. Although Yi Guqin had killed many geniuses along the way, plus the resources of the inner yard disciples, he had more than 300,000 crystal jades on him. But this did not mean that he was willing to be treated as a fool and be at the mercy of others. Anyone with discerning eyes could see that these odds and ends were not worth many crystal jades at all. If the stall owner wants to make money, I have nothing to say. but this is a bit too much." Yiguchen's tone was indifferent. Seeing that Yiguchen did not seem to be able to take out 200,000 crystal jades, the smile on the stall owner's face also disappeared. His tone became cold. 200,000 crystal jades is a fair price. You have to know that these are all things brought out by the elite disciples of the 7 major forces. How can the things they bring out be ordinary? Oh, so even if the elite disciples of the 7 major forces have trash, you can still treat them as treasures? Yiguchen's tone had a hint of playfulness. Of course. Or are you also an elite disciple of the 7 major forces? The stall owner sneered. He was also a martial artist in the 5th transformation of qi refining. Naturally, he could sense that there was no trace of genuine qi fluctuation on Yiguchen's body. So in his opinion, Yiguchen was just an ordinary person who came to treasure hunt to try his luck. Yiguchen nodded slightly and picked up a piece of broken stone on the ground. He stared at the stall owner and said, "May I ask how much crystal jades this stone is worth?" Not only was the stall owner stunned, even the people in the surrounding stalls, including some customers looking for treasures, were stunned. "Are you kidding me?" The stall owner chuckled as if he was looking at an idiot. "Then, what if I add this?" Yiguchen's origin ring flashed between his fingers. A violet gold token fell into his hand. He held the token and placed it in front of the stall owner. The stall owner was stunned when he saw this token. That's the token of a disciple of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas. At the side, another stall owner cried out involuntarily with a trace of astonishment in his eyes. This cry caused everyone's minds to buzz, and they were unable to recover from their shock. On the other hand, the stall owner's eyes were wide open as he stared fixedly at this violet gold token. No one dared to counterfeit the identity token of an elite disciple of the 7 major forces. This stall owner was also a shrewd and knowledgeable person, so he naturally knew that this token was real. Not only that, he also knew the meaning of this token. This is the violet gold token of a disciple in the top 10 of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas. The stall owner's legs went weak, and he sat down on the ground. His lips were trembling as he looked at Yiguchen. The coldness and contempt in his eyes instantly turned into extreme shock and fear. He was actually cheating an elite disciple of a major force, and it was a disciple ranked in the top 10. Young master. I was blind. The stall owner was so frightened that he could not speak clearly. His tongue was tied, and his face flushed red. "How many crystal jades is this stone worth?" Yiguchen still had a smile on his face. "I'll give it to you. Young master, if you take a fancy to anything, feel free to take it." "It's my honor," the stall owner hurriedly said, afraid that he would anger Yiguchen. He also knew that a prodigy like Yiguchen had the most distinguished status even among the 7 major forces. He was not someone a small stall owner like him could afford to offend. "Of course, I won't take advantage of you." Yiguchen took back the token and threw the stone away. He left behind 10,000 crystal jades and took away the pitch-black wooden token and some miscellaneous items. The stall owner only stood up and wiped his sweat when Yiguchen's figure was far away. The surrounding stall owners were also quite shocked. That was really dangerous. But what if that young master finds out that I'm selling useless things? The stall owner was still frightened. He looked at the cloth bag under his stall. There were actually some pitch-black wooden tokens inside. On them were engraved the numbers 3, 5, 8, and 9. Although these wooden tokens were indeed found by him from an elite disciple, he did not study the mystery behind them, so he could only put them out to cheat others. "It's better to leave." The stall owner directly packed up his stall and ran away. On the other side, Yiguchen casually played with the pitch-black broken wooden token. But no matter how he probed, he could not make sense of it. This wooden token did not look like a spirit weapon, and there was no array fluctuation on it. It looked just like an ordinary rotten wooden token. Could it be that I really misjudged it? Yi Guqin could not help but shake his head. He put away the pitch-black wooden token. Anyway, even if he misjudged it, he would only lose 10,000 crystal jades. It was not a big deal to him. However, at this moment, the sound of a woman quarreling suddenly came from afar. Hearing this voice, Yi Guqin's eyes suddenly darkened. It was Mu Xingzu's voice. Chapter 278. In front of a stall, Mu Xingzu bit her cherry lips with her pearly white teeth, and a trace of anger appeared in her eyes. Opposite her, 3 women stood gracefully. The leader of the group was a woman in the middle. She was wearing a snow-white dress that could not hide her voluptuous figure. Especially her ample bosom, which looked as though it would burst out of her clothes. That degree of fullness caused the passing cultivators to involuntarily cast their gazes over, secretly swallowing their saliva. However, facing so many burning gazes, not only was the woman not shy in the slightest, she instead proudly stuck out her full chest. That appearance gave off the feeling of being a wanton woman. At this moment, this woman was playing with a pendant in her jade-like hand. On the pendant hung a blue crystal that looked like a teardrop. This crystal was azure blue and deep. Besides its beautiful appearance, it did not have the slightest special fluctuation. Obviously, it was just an accessory. Just now, Mu Xingzu had taken a fancy to this pendant at a glance and wanted to buy it. They had already agreed on the price, but in the end, these 3 women walked over. The plump woman in the middle even directly snatched the pendant from Mu Xingzu's hands in a rude and unreasonable manner. "Miss, I've already agreed to sell my pendant to this little girl. Look." The stall owner could be considered to have some integrity, and at this moment, he was in a difficult position. "Oh, this pendant is so beautiful. Of course it has to be worn by someone who is worthy of it. Isn't selling it to her like a pearl hiding dust?" The plump woman glanced at Mu Xingzu's flat chest with disdain. Mu Xingzu was not old and was still in the stage of puberty, but her chest could be considered exquisite and pleasant. Of course, it could not be compared to this plump woman. Even among adult women, there were not many who were bigger than this plump woman. "You." Mu Xingzu's face flushed red, and she was extremely embarrassed and angry. The laughter of some men could be faintly heard from the surroundings. Mu Xingzu gritted her teeth and took out the bronze token of the inner court. When this token that represented the inner court of the Sword Sex Forest of Pagodas appeared, the laughter in the surroundings immediately dispersed, and some people could not help but exclaim softly. Even the stall owner was stunned as he recognized that this was the token of the Sword Sex Forest of Pagodas. Looking at this token, the plump woman's face froze slightly, but in the next moment, she revealed a disdainful smile. When did the Sword Sex Forest of Pagodas become so weak? Even the Divine Soul Realm can enter the inner court. The plump woman shook her head and laughed. "That's right. He actually dares to take out this inner academy command token to embarrass himself. What a joke." The 2 ladies beside her also laughed in agreement. "Little girl, you're still too young if you want to suppress me with just an inner courtyard bronze token." After the voluptuous woman finished speaking, she waved her jade-like hand and took out a token. On the token, there were pictures of flowers and auspicious birds. In the middle of the token, there was the word immortal. Of the celestial palace, this time, the crowds moves forest celestial. Of the level divine celestial of her celestial, of the martial, of the celestial. A powerful pressure of the divine soul 5 transformations spread out, causing Mu Xingzu to take a few steps back. Her delicate face was incomparably pale. "Little girl, you have to know that there's always someone better than you. A mere sword sex forest of pagodas doesn't have the qualifications to fight with me." The plump woman chuckled. Just as she was about to hang the crystal pendant around her neck. Suddenly, a blood-red figure tore through the air, accompanied by a whistling fist, and directly smashed towards her plump chest. "Who is it?" The plump woman's face changed drastically. She also felt the power of the fist. Even with her divine soul 5 transformations cultivation, she still felt a little shocked. The plump woman's figure suddenly retreated, and she struck out with her palm, colliding with the fist. Crack! The plump woman's face suddenly turned pale. Her jade-like arm felt as if it was bearing a force of 10,000 pounds, and it made cracking sounds. In an instant, the blood-red figure stretched out a hand and directly snatched the crystal pendant from the plump woman's other hand, and then his figure suddenly retreated. This sudden scene was out of everyone's expectations. "You're saying that a mere inner yard doesn't have the qualifications to fight with you?" An indifferent voice sounded. Yiguchin slowly walked over, and the blood cloud centipede returned to his side. He picked up the crystal pendant in the blood cloud centipede's hand. "Senior brother Yi." Seeing this, Mu Xingzu's big eyes revealed a look of surprise. Yiguchin smiled faintly, untied the necklace, and walked in front of Mu Xingzu. Mu Xingzu's little heart thumped. She was a little shy, and the corners of her mouth revealed a shy smile. Yiguchin personally put the crystal pendant on Mu Xingzu's neck. "Whether I'm worthy or not, it's not for others to say. It's for you to fight for it," Yiguchin said indifferently. Xingzhu understands." Mu Xingzu nodded like a chick pecking rice, but the happiness in her heart was so strong that it could not be dispersed. "Who are you? Do you know that I'm a disciple of the Celestial Palace of the Consonant's Divine Palace?" Not far away, the plump woman's face was ugly. She rubbed her sore and numb jade arm and looked at the blood cloud centipede with fear. "I don't want to cause more trouble. If I leave now, I can pretend that nothing has happened," Yiguchin said calmly. "I'm a disciple of the Celestial Palace, Pan Shuoyan. I wonder what your identity is?" The plump woman named Pan Shuoyan stared at Yiguchin. If Yiguchin didn't have any identity, then she didn't have to worry about anything. Hearing this, Yiguchin sighed. He didn't say anything and took out the inner yard purple gold token. Although it was only a token, when it was taken out, the surrounding people were stunned. They didn't even have time to be shocked. Purple gold token. Pan Shuoyan's delicate body involuntarily took 2 steps back. It was no surprise that she would have such a reaction. Although they were both inner yard tokens, purple gold and bronze tokens were 2 completely different concepts. Facing a bronze token, she could ignore it, but facing a disciple with a purple gold token, her attitude was a little ridiculous. "Who are you? In the top 10 of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas, there doesn't seem to be someone like you." Pan Shuoyan stared at Yiguchin's face. As an elite disciple of the Consonant's Palace, she naturally knew some of the geniuses of the 7 major forces. However, she didn't recognize the young man in front of her. "I haven't been an inner yard disciple for long," Yiguchin said calmly. "Not long. Could it be you're Yiguchin?" Pan Shuoyan immediately reacted. When she shouted this sentence, the surrounding people who had already fallen into a daze opened their mouths even more. It was as if they were dreaming. The genius sword cultivator Yiguchin, who had created a miracle in the 10 prefectures elite assembly, had actually appeared in front of them. In an instant, gaze after gaze landed on Yiguchin. Their gazes were filled with intense curiosity and respect. "That's me," Yiguchin said coldly. At this moment, even the expressions of the 2 girls beside Pan Shuoyan changed. Extreme fear appeared on their faces. Putting aside Yiguchin's current situation, he was a fierce person who dared to brandish his sword at a life and death chamber expert. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. It was no wonder that they were afraid. However, after sensing Yiguchin's aura, Pan Shuoyan burst into laughter. TSK, who would have thought that the genius sword cultivator who killed Qin Aoshi and Xia Yubing in the elite assembly would be reduced to the point where he has to rely on a puppet for support. How sad. How lamentable, although Pan Shuoyan was afraid of the blood cloud centipede and didn't dare to casually attack Yi Guqin and the others. However, even if her words were disgusting, she still felt comfortable. After all, Pan Shuoyan knew that it was impossible for her to take back the pendant from Mu Xingzu. At this moment, a beautiful figure in pink floated over from the other side of the street. When her gaze landed on Yi Guqin, it suddenly lit up. "Young Master Yi. It's you." Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He didn't expect to meet an acquaintance here. Chapter 279. The beautiful figure in pink was a woman of exceptional beauty. She had an indifferent and elegant temperament. Her beautiful eyes were like autumn waters that made one's heart sway. It was the Zither Fairy, who they had formed an alliance with in the Tianhuang Plain. "I didn't expect to meet you here. You joined the Lingxi Palace?" Yi Guqin smiled. Yi Guqin had a good impression of this elegant and gentle beauty. Of course, it was only between friends. Zither Fairy pursed her lips into a smile and nodded. She then turned to look at Pan Shuoyan. Her beautiful face turned cold. "Zither Fairy, I forgot that you are related to the Sword Grandmaster." Seeing the arrival of the Zither Fairy, Pan Shuoyan's face darkened. It was obvious that the two of them did not see eye to eye in the Lingxi Palace. "You better stay in the inn. Doing such a humiliating thing will only bring shame to the Lingxi Palace." The Zither Fairy's tone was cold. Let's go." Seeing that there was no chance left, Pan Shuoyan's beautiful eyes fiercely glanced at the few of them, puffed up her huge breasts, and turned to leave. "It seems that your life in the Lingxi Palace has not been smooth sailing." Looking at Pan Shuoyan's back, Yi Guqin was confused. There will always be people like that. Coming to the sword territory of the void this time, she must be here to stop me from getting my fortune. The Zither Fairy shook her head and said helplessly. "Your cultivation is in the third transformation of the divine soul?" Yi Guqin raised an eyebrow. At the gathering of the elites, the Zither Fairy was only in the meditational level. Now, she was in the third transformation. Such a cultivation speed was already extremely fast. "Yes, I was recognized by the elders in the palace. I relied on many resources to reach this level." The Zither Fairy smiled. Then, her clear eyes flashed as if she was thinking of something. She then said, "Oh right, Mr. Yi, I have something to tell you." "Oh, what is it?" Yi Guqin was a little surprised. "There are too many people here. Let's talk at night." The Zither Fairy lowered her voice and sounded a little mysterious. Mu Xingzu, who was playing with a crystal pendant, twitched her little white ears. She seemed to have heard something like, "talk at night." She immediately turned her gaze to Zither Fairy, looking like a little hen protecting her eggs. When Fairy Zither noticed Mu Xingzu's gaze, she pursed her lips and smiled. Mu Xingzu saw the Zither Fairy's smile and lowered her head in embarrassment. At this moment, Yi Guqin's eyes suddenly narrowed. The origin ring on his finger flashed, and he took out a transmission jade slip. "Brother Yi, are you near the market? Hurry over to the eastern market. Our inner court disciples are having a conflict with the sealed Saber King Palace." Chu Qingqi's voice came from the communication jade slip with a hint of anxiety. "The saber-sealing monarch hall." Yi Guqin put away the jade slip with a strange look in his eyes. He didn't have many interactions with the saber-conferred monarch palace. The only time they met was when he killed Zhao Fengyang, a disciple of the heavenly saber list, at the sword-seeking steel of the Donglin mansion. Although Yi Guqin didn't know much about the saber-sealing monarch hall, he knew that it was a pure saber cultivator organization that despised sword cultivators. Putting that aside, he was destined to have a showdown with the saber-sealing monarch hall's #1 on the heavenly saber ranking, Prime Sovereign Saber Maniac. So no matter what, it was best to understand the saber-sealing monarch hall's situation. "Zither Fairy, I still have something to take care of here. I'll take my leave first." Yiguchen cupped his fists. Is there something troublesome? If there's anything I can help with, we can go together, the zither fairy asked. Yiguchen pondered for a moment and nodded without saying anything. Then, Yiguchen, Mu Xingzu, and the zither fairy headed to the eastern market. At this moment, the vendors in the middle of the eastern market had already removed their stalls, afraid that they would be caught in the crossfire. On both sides of the street, there were many onlookers gathered. After all, the friction and clash between two major forces was very attractive. In the middle of the street, Chu Qingqi's face was grave and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Beside him, there were a few inner courtyard disciples who had collapsed on the ground. Their bodies were covered in blood, and their injuries weren't light. In addition, there were more than 10 inner court disciples who had rushed over. Their eyes were filled with anger as they glared at the group of people opposite them. Leading them were two young men in black. One of them was Zhou Yan, carrying a huge saber that was as heavy as the earth. The other was Yan Kuan, who was holding a light saber. You have gone too far. Chu Qingqi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His cultivation had reached the second transformation of the divine soul realm. Although it wasn't very high, he wasn't someone who could be bullied by anyone. However, both Zhou Yan and Yan Kuan were stronger than him in terms of cultivation realm. But what Chu Qingqi was most afraid of wasn't the two of them, but the red-clothed demonic man standing at the edge of the group of disciples. The man's face was as handsome as a demon, and he emitted a cold demonic aura that made people shudder. Previously, it was Zhou Yan and Yan Kuan who attacked. The red-clothed demonic man stood at the side and watched as if it had nothing to do with him. However, Chu Qingqi knew that the demonic man was the strongest among the disciples of the saber-conferred royal palace. It seems that your people haven't arrived yet. What a pity. Then I'll teach you a lesson first. I'd like to see if you still have the courage to enter the Void Sword realm after being seriously injured, Zhou Yan said playfully. Hearing Zhou Yan's words, the expressions of the inner court disciples, including Chu Qingqi, changed. The Void Sword realm was a great opportunity for sword cultivators like them. If they couldn't enter because of this, they would suffer a great loss. Damn it. If senior brother Bai Zichen and the others weren't so far away, you wouldn't have the chance to show off. An inner court disciple gritted his teeth. You're courting death. Yan Kuan's eyes turned cold as he unleashed his fourth transformation of the divine soul realm. He took a step forward and moved as fast as lightning. The great saber in his hand emitted a sharp saber radiance as he slashed at the inner court disciple's head. This speed was so fast that even Chu Qingqi was unable to react in time. The inner court disciple's face turned pale. He couldn't even react to the pressure of the fourth transformation of the divine soul realm. Just as the inner court disciple was in despair, a figure came between the two of them. The figure stretched out a palm that was overflowing with golden light and was about to clash with the great saber. Do you think my saber is made of wood? Yan Kuan sneered when he saw this. His true qi exploded and spiritual inscriptions radiated from the great saber. Clang! In the next moment, the great saber collided with the golden palm. The palm clenched its 5 fingers and held the great saber tightly. However, before the shock in Yan Kuan's eyes could rise, he heard a cracking sound. The palm had directly crushed the great saber. The palm that was holding the great saber turned over and slammed into Yan Kuan's chest. Yan Kuan was stunned for a moment. Before he could recover from the shock of his great saber being crushed, he was pushed back by the palm. The great saber fragments pierced his body and he spat out blood as he was sent flying. The saber-conferred monarch hall is as arrogant as usual. A young man clapped his hands and spoke with a cold voice. On the sealed Blade King Palace's side, the red-clothed demonic man, who acted as if this matter had nothing to do with him, walked from the edge to the center. Those slightly long and narrow demonic eyes stared at the young man in the middle of the field. You're the sword sect's Yiguchen. Chapter 280. Along with the sinister voice of the red-clothed man, the surrounding onlookers were in an uproar. Their gazes all turned towards the calm youth in the black robe. Perhaps not everyone knew Yiguchin, but Yiguchin's name resounded like thunder in their ears. After all, Yiguchin had created all sorts of miracles during the 10 prefectures elite gathering. Yiguchin looked at the red-clothed demonic man, and a solemn look appeared in his eyes. He could sense the red-clothed man's deep and restrained aura. At the same time, his demonic aura made people feel very uncomfortable. The red-clothed man's strength was extraordinary. Yiguchin thought to himself. Brother Yiguchin, you're finally here. Chu Qingqi walked to Yiguchin's side. Are you guys alright? Yiguchin asked when he saw the blood at the corner of Chu Qingqi's mouth. I'm fine, but a few inner court disciples were seriously injured by Zhou Yan and Yan Kuan. Chu Qingqi said as he stared at the group from the saber-sealing monarch hall. Zhou Yan and Yan Kuan are both disciples on the heavenly saber list. One is ranked 7th, while the other is ranked 10th. However, they aren't the biggest threat. The biggest threat is the red-clothed man. He's ranked 3rd on the heavenly saber list, demonic saber Nialing. Chu Qingqi said solemnly. Demonic saber Nialing. Yiguchin turned to look at the demonic youth called Nialing. Among the sky prides of the saber-sealing monarch hall, besides the strongest and most famous saber maniac, there are 3 other sky prides known as 3 sabers, Chu Qingqi said coldly. 3 sabers? Yiguchin realized that he didn't know much about the saber-sealing monarch hall. Demonic saber Lingju, demonic saber Nialing, and blood saber Mo Juechen. Chu Qingqi said. Mo Juechen. Yiguchin raised his eyebrows as he recalled how he had cut off Mo Juechen's arm with the universal sacred sword. Of course, that was because Yiguchin had used a trick to resonate with the sword-seeking steel. That was how the sword-seeking steel had manifested the sacred sword of heaven and earth. Otherwise, Yiguchin would have been killed by Mo Juechen. The sword sect's Yiguchin once killed Zhao Fengyang, a disciple of my heavenly saber list. Furthermore, he cut off one of Mo Juechen's arms. From the looks of it now, you are indeed crippled. Nialing looked at Yiguchin with his bewitching, narrow eyes. His gaze was like that of a venomous snake. It was very frightening. The saber-sealing monarch hall is truly domineering. Yiguchin's eyes were indifferent. Although he could sense the valiant aura surging around Nialing, he was still not afraid. Yiguchin, you have injured Yan Kuan. Don't even think about leaving safely today. Zhou Yan shouted coldly. Yan Kuan, who had taken the healing medicine and had his hand on his chest, also stared at Yiguchin viciously. He wouldn't have been hurt like this by Yiguchin's move if he hadn't been so shocked that he had lost his mind. But the most important thing was that Yiguchin had crushed his spiritual inscription weapon, the Tachi. The corner of Yan Kuan's eyes twitched in disbelief when he saw Lin Yun's physical strength. Yiguchin, Nialing, have a good temper. I like to watch a show and not participate in it. But even if I don't make a move, it doesn't mean that others won't. For example, a playful smile rose on Nialing's lips. As soon as he finished speaking, a ferocious aura suddenly exploded from the street not far away. That fluctuation caused everyone in the surroundings to continuously retreat while their hearts trembled in fear. A one-armed youth in black slowly walked over. He only had one arm on his right hand and he was dragging a blood-red saber behind him. The saber scraped against the ground, causing sparks to fly and creating a trench. The gray-haired youth with a scar walked over step by step. With every step he took, his aura spread. Finally, the aura of his 6 transformations spread in all directions, bringing with it an extremely powerful and domineering pressure. The main character is here. Nialing retreated to the side as if he was waiting for a good show. Yiguchin. The gray-haired youth raised his eyes and stared at Yiguchin with cold, domineering, and murderous eyes. Blood saber. Mo Juechin. Yi Guchen slowly clenched his fists and frowned. Not good. The hearts of the disciples of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest, including Chu Qingqi, thumped. Blood Saber Mo Juechen, Demon Saber Nialing, Zhou Yan, and the other top 10 disciples of the Heavenly Saber list. The Sword Sect's Tower Forest was at an absolute disadvantage in this conflict. That day, you cut off one of my arms. I said that I would definitely take revenge. Today, I will use your life to repay my arm. Mo Juechen was a man of few words. If he could use his saber, he would try his best not to use his mouth. He held the sword burial saber in his right hand and directly slashed at Yi Guchen. This attack was not something that Yan Kuen's attack could compare to. It was on a completely different level. Even if Yi Guchen used the invincible Vajra body, he might not be able to block it with his bare hands. Moreover, Yi Guchen's sea of qi had not been unsealed. Overall, it was still difficult for him to fight against Mo Juechen. However, at this moment, the sound of a zither suddenly spread out and blocked Mo Juechen's attack with a loud bang. The person who blocked it was Zither Fairy. Consonance Palace? Nia Ling raised his eyebrows slightly. Consonance Palace is actually helping Yi Guchen. Alas, the dignified sword sect has fallen to the point of hiding behind a woman. Such discussions could be vaguely heard from the surroundings. Mo Juechen's expression did not change. He looked at the girl in pink who had stepped forward bravely, then turned to look at Yi Guchen. The corners of his mouth curled up coldly. Yi Guchen, back then, you used that shocking sword to cut off one of my arms. Now, you want to stand behind a woman? Yi Guchen's expression was calm. He was not angered by the discussions. Young Master Yi, I believe that you will definitely recover your cultivation in the future. For now, you don't have to fight them head-on, Zither Fairy said calmly. Actually, you don't have to do anything. Yi Guchen was very calm. He still had the blood cloud puppet. It was impossible for Mo Juechen to take his life. Yi Guchen, let's see how long you can hide. Mo Juechen slashed his saber again. As the cultivation of the 6 transformations of the Divine Soul erupted, a blood-red saber light shot out horizontally. Such power caused Zither Fairy's expression to change drastically. Just as Yi Guchen was about to use the blood cloud puppet, a green sword light flew over and directly collided with the blood-red saber light. That sword light, could it be Senior Brother Bai Zichen and the others? Many inner court disciples were excited when they saw this. 2 figures walked over from afar. Ha, the people of the titled Saber Monarch Hall are still so hot-tempered. The one who spoke was a man in green. His face was as clear as jade, and he held a green longsword in his hand. The aura around him had clearly reached the 7 transformations of the Divine Soul. It's actually him, the 9 profound sex green-clothed sword cultivator, Chen Yi. Chu Qingqi was rather surprised. Chen Yi was a rather famous genius of the Sword Dao in the 9 profound sect. Although he was slightly inferior to Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, and the others, he wasn't too far off. Yi Guchen was also a little surprised. He had never met Chen Yi before, so there was no reason for Chen Yi to help him. However, when Yi Guchen's gaze turned to the person beside Chen Yi, he suddenly understood. That figure had the temperament of a scholar. He held a folding fan in his hand and had a tang saber at his waist. It was Bai Yanji. Brother Yi Guchen, long time no see. Bai Yanji cupped his hands towards Yi Guchen. With the arrival of the azure-clothed sword cultivator Chen Yi and Bai Yanji, the entire situation fell into a subtle state. Chapter 281. Mo Juechen's expression sank when he saw the Consonance Divine Palace's Zither Fairy and the 9 profound sects Chen Yi getting involved. He could overlook the Zither Fairy and Bai Yanji, but he couldn't ignore Chen Yi. You sure have a lot of friends. Mo Juechen's eyes were as cold as ice. Mo Juechen always remembered the grudge of losing his arm. It was like a whip to him. He originally thought that he could kill Yi Guqin, but he didn't expect this to happen. TSK. Mo Juechen, it seems like you won't be able to kill Yi Guqin today. Nya Ling shook his head and smiled. Another figure flew over from afar and shouted, "Is the saber-sealing monarch hall so blind? How dare you humiliate the inner courtyard disciples when I'm not around?" Ji Ling, who was dressed in a green robe, arrived. There was a trace of killing intent on her beautiful face as she looked coldly at the disciples of the saber-sealing monarch hall. Since Ji Ling was here, the dust had settled. Yi Guqin heaved a sigh of relief. He wasn't afraid of Mo Juechen, but it would expose his blood cloud centipede, which wasn't beneficial to him. As for Mo Juechen, as long as Yi Guqin could make a breakthrough, he wouldn't be afraid. Yi Guqin, you're lucky today. Mo Juechen couldn't wait to kill Yi Guqin, but he knew that it was impossible. He turned around and left. At the same time, he said, "I hope you'll still be so lucky after entering the Void Sword Realm." After Mo Juechen left, Nya Ling stretched his back and left as well. As for Zhou Yan and the others, they naturally didn't dare to stay any longer after seeing Blood Blade and Demon Blade leave. They left after shooting a cold glance at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin frowned when he saw the disciples of the saber-sealing monarch hall leaving. It seemed like he had caused a lot of trouble. However, Yi Guqin wasn't afraid of trouble. "Yi Guqin, it seems like Mo Juechen is here to seek revenge. Do you need me to help you?" Ji Ling's beautiful eyes flashed as she casually asked. "Thank you for your kindness, senior sister. But it's no problem. I'll take care of it myself," Yi Guqin said with a faint smile. "Humph, back then, you were only able to cut off Mo Juechen's arm by relying on the geographical advantage of the sword-seeking tablet. Now that he has come to seek revenge, don't you still need the help of others?" Behind Ji Ling, Ting Jingshan and the rest had also rushed over. At this moment, they coldly mocked. Yi Guqin shook his head. He didn't even seem to care. When you enter the Void Sword Realm, let's see how you deal with it." Ting Jingshan's face turned cold. "If there's nothing else, everyone should stay in the inn and wait for the opening of the Void Sword Realm. It won't do us any good if we encounter the Saber-Sealing King Palace or the Limitless Sword Sect." Ji Ling waved his hand and the surrounding inner court disciples responded in unison. Among the 7 major forces, the Saber-Sealing King Palace and the Limitless Sword Sect had the worst relationship with the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. "Brother Yi, long time no see. Let's get together," Bai Yanji invited. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. After that, Yi Guqin, Mu Xingzu, Zither Fairy, Bai Yanji, Chen Yi, and the others had a small gathering in a restaurant. During this time, both Bai Yanji and Zither Fairy were tactful enough not to mention Su Jianshi. Obviously, in their eyes, Su Jianshi had suffered such a serious injury and was almost certain to die. Yi Guqin also understood in his heart, but he didn't say anything. No matter what price he had to pay, he had to save Su Jianshi. The first step to saving her was to increase his strength. Only then would he be qualified to enter the land of 5 elements and search for traces of the sacred elixir. After the small gathering, Yi Guqin and Mu Xingzu returned to the inn where the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was located. It was night and the moonlight was cool. Yi Guqin sat cross-legged in his room to recover. At this time, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Yi Guqin said. Dressed in pink, Zither Fairy walked in with light steps. Under the illumination of the candlelight in the room, Zither Fairy's fair face was covered with a layer of red, making her look charming. "Zither Fairy, can you tell me what it is now?" Yi Guqin smiled faintly. Zither Fairy nodded slightly and said seriously, "It's like this. A senior sister who has been to the Void Sword Realm told me that she accidentally found a secret cave residence. Although I don't know what the situation is, I don't think anyone has found it." "An undiscovered cave?" Yi Guqin's eyelids twitched. If so, it would be a great opportunity. But then Yi Guqin frowned and said, Zither Fairy, although we have a good relationship, you have no reason to share such an opportunity with me, right? Hearing this, Zither Fairy showed a touch of helplessness and said, "It's true, but this news was accidentally found out by Pan Shuoyan." "I see." Yi Guqin nodded slightly. With Pan Shuoyan's character, she will definitely not let go of this opportunity. Not to mention that her cultivation is higher than mine. If she enters the Void Sword realm, she will definitely gather allies and plot against me together, leaving me with no way to escape. "So you found me and want me to ally with you to deal with Pan Shuoyan?" Yi Guqin said. "Yes, if Mr. Yi is willing to help, we can share the opportunity in the cave equally, as long as it is not taken away by Pan Shuoyan," Zither Fairy said sincerely. Although Zither Fairy was also very curious about the opportunity in the cave, she couldn't accept that Pan Shuoyan had obtained that opportunity. Otherwise, if Pan Shuoyan's strength increased, it would be difficult for Zither Fairy to stay in the Heavenly Immortal Palace. "Okay, it's not the first time we have formed an alliance." Yi Guqin agreed without hesitation. Moreover, he did not have a good impression of Pan Shuoyan. "Then it's a deal." Zither Fairy pursed her lips and smiled flirtatiously. Yi Guqin's face was still indifferent and there was no change in his expression. Looking at Yi Guqin's unmoved expression, even Zither Fairy could not help but feel annoyed. Could it be that she really did not have any charm? Then, Zither Fairy left. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He knew that the Void Sword realm would definitely be a fierce battle and there would be turbulent undercurrents. But no matter what, he had to achieve his goal. Then, Yi Guqin sat cross-legged and meditated again. It was a quiet night. The next day, when the light emitted by the Celestial Emperor's sword shone on the ground, Yi Guqin slowly opened his eyes. Because he felt that there was a violent space vibration coming from the floating mountain far away, accompanied by thunderous roars. Even though the 100 Break City was still a distance away from the floating mountain, it was still thunderous and caused the city walls of the 100 Break City to tremble. "Disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, listen up. The Void Sword realm is about to open and the opportunity that belongs to you has arrived. Don't lose the momentum of a sword cultivator." Elder Qing He's loud voice came from the inn. "Yes, sir." Along with numerous loud shouts, strands of aura tore through the sky like the sharpness of swords. Numerous figures flashed out explosively from within the inn, and all of them were the elites of the inner court of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas. At the same time, in the encampments of the other forces in the 100 Break City, there were also densely packed auras that soared into the sky. Some of the auras were as overbearing as a wild blade, while others were as unpredictable as an abyss. Many elites and geniuses from the 7 forces rushed to the floating mountain. This was not only a fight for the opportunity, but also a fight between the geniuses from the 7 forces. It was a fight between the elites. Even with Yi Guqin's cold and indifferent temperament, at this moment, a flame was gradually ignited in his black eyes. The wind and clouds transformed into a dragon, waiting for this moment. Chapter 282. The floating mountain was the base of the Void Sword sect in ancient times. Around the floating mountain, the space vibrated and an independent space world was hidden inside. Although the area was not particularly large, it was several times larger than the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. Usually, when the Void Sword realm was not open, the floating mountain was quiet and there were few people. But today, around the floating mountain, the sound of wind breaking could be heard one after another. Figures landed around the floating mountain like locusts passing by. Gazes after gazes looked towards the floating mountain that was hidden within the clouds. Their eyes were filled with an extremely heated expression. The Void Sword realm only opened once a year. Every time it opened, there would be disciples of the 7 major forces who would obtain unimaginable and amazing opportunities, such as top-level mystical rune weapons, sage-to-be medicines, or the inheritance of some expert. For sword cultivators, the Void Sword realm was a place of extraordinary significance. Because Xian Hao, the genius of the limitless sword sect, had obtained a peerless void sword essence from it. For sword cultivators, this kind of opportunity was even more valuable than those mystical rune weapons, sage-to-be medicines, and so on. Therefore, there were also some sword cultivators who wanted to obtain the sword essence inheritance from it. However, that kind of opportunity was rarer than other opportunities. Not long after, Yi Guqin and the other disciples of the sword sect Pagoda Forest also rushed to the vicinity of the floating mountain. Yi Guqin raised his head and looked over. The floating mountain stood tall and majestic, exuding a sense of majesty. Especially the surrounding clouds and mist, which covered the lower half of the mountain. It looked as if the mountain was suspended in the void. That was how the floating mountain got its name. However, what caught Yi Guqin's attention the most was that the space around the floating mountain was vibrating like water waves. Every time it vibrated, a small world seemed to be hidden in it. Brother Yi, there is one thing I have to tell you. When the space around the floating mountain is vibrating most violently, the entrance to the void sword realm will appear. However, it will only be for a short time and then it will close. So, pay attention to the timing of entering, Chu Qingqi said. If that's the case, then what about getting out? Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He really didn't know much about this. If we leave, it will take about a month. In the center of the void sword realm, there is a transmitting formation. A month later, the formation will automatically generate spatial fluctuations and tear the void apart. That is when we leave. However, it will only last for a short while. If we miss this opportunity, we may be trapped in it for about a year. Chu Qingqi's tone was slightly serious. Oh, in that case, if the spiritual qi in the void sword realm is abundant, why not stay there for a year? Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows. Brother Yi, you may not know this, but when the nether sword realm is completely closed, all the dangerous formations will be fully activated, and some powerful demonic beasts hidden deep within will also appear. Therefore, if you are left inside, even if you are a hidden latch of life and death or a spiritual bridge of heaven and earth expert, you may not have a chance to survive. Chu Qingqi's words were heavy. I see. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. It seemed that the void sword realm was not a good place. Just as Yi Guqin was thinking, the divine condor flapped its wings and landed beside him. Yi Guqin would not restrict the divine condor's freedom, nor did he ask where it had gone. I feel that this treasure land is a great opportunity for me, the divine condor said mysteriously. Is that so? Yi Guqin found it funny. As time passed, the spatial fluctuations around the floating mountain became more and more violent. Some of the heavens' prides of the seven forces also appeared one after another. The people of the three imperial palaces are here. That's Little Flame Emperor Ji Yen. Suddenly, many warriors in the surroundings exclaimed in low voices. Obviously, they had seen some incredible heavens' prides. Yi Guqin also looked over and saw a young man in the lead among the disciples of the three imperial palaces. He was dressed in a fiery red robe and had short crimson-red hair that looked like it was spurting flames. The most peculiar thing was that his eyes were a crimson crystalline color, which made people feel a burning sensation when they looked at him. It's one of the three little emperors of the three imperial palaces, Little Flame Emperor Ji Yen. The three heavens prides of the three imperial palaces were all taught by their three palace masters. Their strength is extraordinary, but the other two heavens prides don't seem to have come, Chu Qingqi said. Yi Guqin nodded inwardly. The three palace masters of the three imperial palaces were all experts of the divine dwelling king stage. In terms of foundation, they were not much inferior to the limitless sword sect. And Yi Guqin could tell from Ji Yan's aura that he was at least a heaven's pride of the sixth transformation of the divine spirit. The people of the nine profound sect are here. Another group of people arrived, led by the azure-clothed sword cultivators Chen Yi and Bai Yanji. Because of Bai Yanji, Yi Guqin and Chen Yi had some interactions, which could be considered as forming good karma. Chen Yi and Bai Yanji looked at Yi Guqin and nodded with a faint smile. Yi Guqin returned the greeting. Soon after, another group of dazzling figures appeared. It was a group of extremely charming women. Every single one of them was charming and alluring, delicate and exquisite, causing the gazes of the majority of the cultivators present to converge towards them. Among this group of people, the most conspicuous were naturally Pan Shuoyan and Zither Fairy, who were standing at the front. There was no need to mention Zither Fairy. Her beauty was on par with Situ Hongxue in the Saint Origin Empire, and her popularity had always been very high. Pan Shuoyan, on the other hand, attracted everyone's attention purely with her enchanting posture. In particular, her ample bosom swayed up and down as she moved her feet, which was extremely attractive. Zither Fairy looked at Yi Guqin and nodded with a smile, but a glimmer of light flashed in the depths of her crystal-like eyes. Yi Guqin naturally understood the meaning behind it. He had already exchanged communication jade slips with Zither Fairy, and they would join hands when the time came. On the other side, Pan Shuoyan's beautiful eyes coldly glanced at Yi Guqin and Mu Xingzu, and then turned to look at Zither Fairy. The corner of her mouth lifted into a sarcastic smile, and said, "Zither Fairy, now that Yi Guqin's true chi has been crippled, he's no different from a cripple. What's the benefit of being on good terms with him?" Pan Shuoyan did not lower her voice, so everyone present could hear it. Soon after, many different gazes were thrown at Yi Guqin. There were various meanings in their gazes. Yi Guqin's expression was still indifferent. He had long been used to such strange gazes. Pan Shuoyan, the relationship between people is not only about cooperation and exploitation. Not everyone is as snobbish as you. Zither Fairy said indifferently. Pretentious white lotus. Pan Shuoyan rolled her eyes, looking extremely disdainful. She already had a plan in mind. This time, the Void Sword Realm would definitely make Zither Fairy suffer. Just as these people arrived, powerful auras swept over from afar. The degree of concentration indicated that it wasn't just one force, but several forces had arrived at the same time. Looking at the several forces that came, Yi Guqin's black eyes flickered with an extremely sharp cold light. These forces all had enmity with him. Chapter 283. In the southeast direction, a group of black-clothed cultivators with sabers rushed over. Other than Demon Blade Nye Ling and Blood Blade Mo Juechen, there was also someone Yi Guqin was familiar with. The brawny man carried a saber that was as tall as a person on his back. His aura was imposing and extraordinary. He was the great desolate mansion's Shinto clan's genius, blade maniac Shinto Miao, who had joined forces with Xia Yubing and the others to hunt him down in the infinite plains. Yi Guqin observed Shinto Miao's aura and realized that he had also reached the third transformation of the Divine Soul Realm. When the group from the Sealed Saber Monarch Palace arrived, two groups of people also arrived from two other directions. One of the groups was a group of young men and women who were dressed rather luxuriously. All of them had an innate noble aura. That aura didn't come from their strength, but from their identity. "They're from the Saint Origin Academy," some cultivators whispered. The Saint Origin Academy was backed by the Saint Origin dynasty's imperial family. Therefore, most of the people in the academy were princes, princesses, and young marquises. Yi Guqin also saw a familiar face among the group from the Saint Origin Academy. He was Crown Prince Yueni, who was dressed in luxurious golden robes and had a faint arrogance and superior aura. However, when Crown Prince Yueni looked at Yi Guqin, the arrogance in his eyes instantly turned into fear and resentment. He had schemed against Yi Guqin many times in the infinite plains. He had lured Qin Aoshi and Yi Guqin into a bloody battle and later joined forces with Xia Yubing, Shinto Miao, and Murong Ditian to kill Yi Guqin. Regardless of Yi Guqin's current strength, the shadow he had cast on Crown Prince Yueni wouldn't fade away for a long time. Yi Guqin had also noticed Crown Prince Yueni. On the other side, Yuan Mia looked at Crown Prince Yueni with an extremely cold gaze. However, what caught Yi Guqin's attention the most wasn't Crown Prince Yueni, but the young man in black and gold armor standing beside him. The young man also held a black and gold spear in his hand. His aura was even more powerful than Prince Yuan's. Chu Qingqi noticed Yi Guchen's gaze and couldn't help but say, "That young man is young Ho Fangchen from Saint Origin Academy. He is also a heaven's proud son with the 7 transformations of divine soul." Oh, it seems that this void sword realm is indeed full of hidden talents. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. The young Marquis Fang Chen, the little flame emperor Ji Yan, and the azure-clothed sword cultivator Chen Yi. Normally, it would be difficult to see even one of these geniuses, but now, all of them had gathered together. However, what caused Yi Guchen's expression to darken the most was not these 2 groups of people, but the figures that had arrived on their swords. They were all wearing black and white Taoist robes. Every single one of their auras was like a sword that soared into the sky, bringing with it a sharp glint that would draw the attention of others. The one with the deepest enmity with the sword sect Talon wasn't the saber-sealing Monarch Hall, but the Limitless Sword Sect. The weakest of the Limitless Sword Sect's disciples was at the Divine Soul Realm. Among them, Yi Guchen also saw some familiar figures, such as Xianing, Murong Ditian, and the others. Xianing could be said to be domineering during the elite battle of the Infinite Plains. However, with his 2nd transformation of Divine Soul Realm cultivation, he could only stay at the back of the group. In addition, what surprised Yi Guchen was Murong Ditian's aura. Murong Ditian's aura had also faintly reached the 3rd transformation of Divine Soul Realm. Just as Yi Guchen looked over, Murong Ditian also looked over. His sword-like eyebrows immediately knitted together. After snatching the immemorial sword token and taking away Situ Hongxue, Yi Guchen and Murong Ditian were already irreconcilable enemies. This brat is actually still alive. Murong Ditian's face darkened. He originally thought that Yi Guchen wouldn't have many days left after being poisoned by the Soul Star spirit-devouring worm. However, in the end, he still appeared in front of him as if nothing had happened. However, what made Murong Ditian's lips curl into a cold smile was that he indeed didn't feel a trace of true qi from Yi Guchen's body. It was obvious that in his eyes, even if Yi Guchen wasn't dead, he was no different from a cripple. You have lost your cultivation and still dare to come to the Void Sword Realm. This place will be your burial ground. Murong Ditian's face darkened as he said coldly in his heart. Yi Guchen's eyes were deep as he naturally knew what Murong Ditian was thinking. However, the one that made Yi Guchen fearful wasn't Murong Ditian. Instead, it was the man who stood at the front of the Limitless Sword Sect Sun Moon Hall's disciples. The man had long black and white hair that fluttered in the wind. His expression was incomparably indifferent. Even though the 7 great forces had gathered and many geniuses had gathered, he didn't seem to care at all. He looked as if he didn't care at all as he looked at the floating mountain indifferently. It was as if no one could stop his footsteps. He is. Yi Guchen's brows were tightly knitted. Although they had never met before, Yi Guchen could vaguely guess the man's identity. Damn it, it's Xian Hao. Xian Hao, why is he here? He has already been here a few times. Over at the Sword Sect's Tower Forest side, all the disciples' faces darkened. Even Bai Zichen, Ji Ling and the other top 5 geniuses had grave and fearful expressions. This Xian Hao's cultivation. Divine Soul 9 transformations. Yi Guchen stared at Xian Hao. Divine Soul 9 transformations, this was the highest realm among the 7 major forces Heaven's Prides. The next step would be the Life and Death Chamber. If one could really reach the Life and Death Chamber at such a young age, not to mention the Saint Origin dynasty, even the entire South Sky region's Heaven's Prides would have a place. However, the Life and Death Chamber required great luck and comprehension. It was also because of this that Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang and the others were stuck at this realm. Even so, Xian Hao and the others were still firmly standing at the peak of the 7 major forces Heaven's Prides. Compared to him, Ji Yan, Fang Chen, Chen Yi and the others were much dimmer. With Xian Hao's arrival, not to mention the Sword Sect's Tower Forest, even the other forces' atmosphere became heavy. Whether it was Little Flame Emperor Ji Yan, Fiend Blade Nia Ling, young Marquis Fang Chen, or even the green-clothed sword cultivator Chen Yi, they all stared at Xian Hao, feeling as if a huge rock was pressing down on their chests. With Xian Hao's cultivation, I'm afraid that only the Little War Emperor can contend with him. Ji Yan thought inwardly. The Little War Emperor he mentioned was naturally the leader of the three little kings, the strongest heaven's pride of the three palaces. Only prime sovereigns can deal with this person. Fiend Blade Nia Ling's gaze turned solemn. The blade-sealing king palace despised all sword cultivators, so they naturally didn't have a good impression of the limitless sword sect. After Xian Hao's arrival, the entire clamorous floating mountain seemed to fall silent, as if it had fallen into a vague pressure. Is this the deterrence of a top heaven's pride? Sensing the heavy atmosphere, Ye Guqin couldn't help but smile faintly. He didn't feel any pressure. As long as he could break the seal and make a breakthrough, Ye Guqin wouldn't be any weaker than Xian Hao and the others. Rumble. Amidst this silent wait, the clouds around the floating mountain surged like waves. The vibrating void also seemed to tremble violently, like a calm lake that had a huge rock thrown into it, causing ripples to appear. Boom! There was another explosion in the void. Many distortions appeared in the space around the floating mountain, like the entrance to a vortex. One could faintly see another small world inside. Brother Yi, now is the time. Chu Qingqi shouted. As soon as the whirlpool entrances appeared, all the heaven's prides and elite disciples of the seven forces rushed towards the whirlpool entrances. The Battle of the Void Sword Realm had officially begun. Chapter 284. This was an incomparably ancient land. There were mountains, rivers, and many dilapidated palaces scattered across the land. Although it had been covered in dust for a long time, one could vaguely see its former glory and magnificence. Following the distortion of the surrounding space, many figures suddenly flashed and appeared from the entrance of the whirlpool in this originally quiet land. They landed in different places. Because of the uncertainty of the entrance of the whirlpool, everyone who entered didn't know where they would land. If they happened to land in a killing array or a desperate situation, they could only admit that they were unlucky. A beautiful figure in green clothes suddenly emerged from the entrance of a whirlpool. She had bright eyes and white teeth, and was pretty and cute. It was Mu Xingzu. She and Ye Guqin had entered the same whirlpool entrance, but when they came out, they were scattered all over the place. We're actually scattered. However, Xingzhu can't drag senior brother Yi down. I'll work hard on my own first and look for opportunities. Mu Xingzhu cheered herself on. However, at this moment, a ghost-like blue figure floated past in the distance. What's that? Mu Xingzhu's heart suddenly felt a chill. She was the only one around here, and the surroundings were very quiet. However, Mu Xingzhu's body was almost covered in goosebumps. There was no one around, but she seemed to feel that there was a gaze quietly watching her in the dark. Who is it? Who is it? Come out quickly. Mu Xingzhu's silver teeth chattered and trembled. There was a trace of fear in her misty eyes. Even if a monster appeared, Mu Xingzhu wouldn't be so afraid. However, no woman could have the courage to face this kind of strange atmosphere. At this moment, a ghost-like blue figure flashed past in the distance again like a ghost. There's a ghost. Mu Xingzhu couldn't bear it anymore. She directly flew away, and her real qi surged. She quickly left this place. However, the panicked Mu Xingzhu did not notice that the blue crystal pendant around her neck had a faint cold light. After Mu Xingzhu left, that ghost-like figure seemed to be chanting in the dark. 1,000 years since the Blue Bridge of Broken Love, Jun Wen's return has yet to be determined. In another part of the Void Sword Realm, a vortex entrance was vibrating in the void. After that, a dark-robed young man appeared. It was Ye Guqin. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth here is indeed different from that of the outside world. Ye Guqin surveyed the vast and ancient land. Although it looked a little desolate, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth here was much denser than the outside world. One day of cultivation in the Void Sword realm was equivalent to 5 days in the outside world. Of course, the reason for such a difference in spiritual chi was that the Void Sword realm was a small world independent of the outside world. It would only open once a year due to space vibrations, so the spiritual chi of heaven and earth here was denser than the outside world. Let's take a look around and roughly understand the situation. Yi Guqin was not in a hurry to look for opportunities, because there was a whole month's time. Compared to looking for opportunities, it was more important to understand the situation here first. After thinking about it, Yi Guqin moved his feet and dashed into the distance. As Yi Guqin moved, he also came across some dilapidated palaces and pavilions. However, after searching them, he did not find anything valuable. It was obvious that after so many openings, the obvious opportunities had all been taken away. Could it be that I can only gain something in the Pill Hall of the Sword Pavilion? Yi Guqin could not help but think. At this moment, a shadow covered the sky, accompanied by the sound of wings flapping. Brother Condor. Yi Guqin looked over and saw that it was the Divine Condor. Ga, I found you, little Yi. The Divine Condor flew down. How did Brother Condor know that I am here? Yi Guqin asked. The Void Sword realm covered a vast area. Without a communication jade slip, it was difficult to find the other party immediately. Grandpa Condor's nose is very sensitive. The Divine Condor put its wings on its waist and said proudly. Is that so? Yi Guqin was a little speechless. But then, Yi Guqin and the Divine Condor went on their way. Because they had been together for so long, the Divine Condor reluctantly allowed Yi Guqin to sit on its back. Sitting on the Divine Eagle, Yi Guqin soared into the sky and could see the land around him. At this moment, Yi Guqin suddenly sensed an extremely shocking demonic chi surging in a mountain range in the distance. The vigorous demonic chi fluctuation made Yi Guqin slightly shocked. However, what made Yi Guqin focus was that the demonic chi fluctuation did not seem to belong to a living demonic beast. It was more like some kind of remnant pressure. Opportunity, it's an opportunity. Boy Yi, Grandpa Condor's opportunity is here. Sensing the demonic chi, the Divine Condor's eyes immediately turned red. Like a cat that smelled meat, it flew directly towards the source of the demonic chi fluctuation. Brother Condor, you'd better be careful. Yi Guqin frowned. Because he vaguely sensed that there were many ferocious auras hibernating in the mountain range. As Yi Guqin and the Divine Condor approached the mountain range, Yi Guqin also saw that at the entrance of the mountain range, there was an ancient broken stone tablet with the words, Demonic Beast Garden, carved on it. Is this mountain range where the Void Sword sect kept demonic beasts in ancient times? Yi Guqin guessed. Roar! Just as the Divine Condor flew into the mountain range, a giant snake covered in blood-red scales suddenly burst out from the dense forest below. It opened its bloodthirsty fangs and bit at the Divine Condor. You're courting death. The Divine Condor's eyes turned red. Eagle-type demonic beasts were supposed to be the nemesis of snake-type demonic beasts, but this blood-red giant snake seemed to be unusually ferocious and fearless. The Divine Condor stretched out its hook-like claws and directly grabbed the blood-red giant snake's head. With a crack, it pierced into the snake's head. The Divine Condor stretched out its sharp beak and pecked the blood-red giant snake's head open. Blood splattered everywhere. Brother Condor is really fierce. Yi Guqin was also speechless. The Divine Condor's eyes were blood-red. At this moment, it was as if it had entered battle mode. No difficulty could stop it from going to the place where the demonic chi gathered. However, as the Divine Condor went deeper into the mountain range, the demonic beasts that appeared were also stronger. Not to mention rank 3 demonic beasts, there were even a few rank 4 demonic beasts. And because of the rich spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the void sword realm, the strength and combat strength of these demonic beasts were also slightly higher than those of the outside world. However, Yiguchen finally saw how powerful the divine condor was when it went all out. Even rank 4 demonic beasts of the same level as it could hardly resist a few rounds. Now, Yiguchen completely believed that the divine condor was indeed not an ordinary divine condor. Its combat strength was extraordinarily strong. And under such a fierce battle, Yiguchen and the divine condor were finally about to reach the place where the demonic chi was oppressive. Yiguchen suddenly felt that the 5-colored golden core in his dantian had started to tremble again. Could it be? Yiguchen's eyes revealed a hint of surprise. The last time the 5-colored golden core trembled was when it encountered the black dragon python with a trace of the dragon clan's bloodline in the Venerable's cave. It was also because it absorbed the black dragon python's blood essence and demonic soul that Yiguchen was able to activate the wood azure dragon totem. Could it be the same this time? Yiguchen was slightly excited. However, at this moment, a majestic demonic chi suddenly exploded in the mountain range, accompanied by a loud roar. Rank 5 demonic beast. The divine condor and Yiguchen were both shocked. Chapter 285. Ordinary 5th rank demonic beasts were already as powerful as life and death chamber experts. As for peak 5th rank demonic beasts, they were as powerful as heaven and earth spiritual bridge experts. Yiguchen and the divine condor looked over and saw a ferocious tiger that was 10 feet long and 10 feet tall rushing out of the mountains. There were feathered wings on both sides of the tiger's ribs. As its wings flapped, the tiger soared into the sky. Demonic chi burst out as it pounced on Yiguchen and the divine condor. It's a flying feather tiger. Yiguchen's eyes narrowed. This demonic beast not only had the terrifying strength of a tiger, but also could fly and burrow into the ground. It was extremely ferocious. Although it was only an ordinary 5th rank demonic beast, it was still as powerful as life and death chamber experts. Yiguchen and the divine condor were no match for it. Gosh, I can't deal with this tiger. The divine condor screamed like a girl being stared at by a pervert. Roar. The flying feather tiger opened its mouth and roared. This was not just a simple threat. The powerful sound waves spread out like transparent ripples. Yiguchen and the divine condor felt dizzy, as if thunder and lightning were roaring in their heads. Some high-level demonic beasts or beasts with bloodlines had demonic beast super skills. Obviously, this was not an ordinary roar. It was one of the flying feather tiger's super skills, Sky Tiger Sound Wave. Roar. Seeing Yiguchen and the divine condor in a daze, the flying feather tiger flapped its wings and slapped out with its tiger claws, tearing through the air. That ferocious strength, coupled with the tiger claws that were as sharp as divine weapons, made it difficult for even a genius in the 9 transformations of divine soul to withstand one attack. Yiguchen bit the tip of his tongue and forced himself to wake up. His origin ring flashed as he took out the blood cloud centipede. A bloody shadow flashed as the blood cloud centipede's fist collided with the flying feather tiger's claw, causing a violent explosion. The surrounding air turned into ripples, shaking the surroundings. Roar. The flying feather tiger roared in pain and was sent flying. The blood cloud centipede is indeed extraordinary. Yiguchen exhaled softly. However, even though the blood cloud centipede had blocked the flying feather tiger's attack, Yiguchen could sense that the demonic cloud blood crystal behind the blood cloud centipede's head had lost some of its energy. Previously, when Yiguchen used the blood cloud puppet, he limited it to the strength of the divine soul 5th transformation. Therefore, the consumption of the demon cloud blood crystal's energy was very small. But this time, in order to fight against the flying feather tiger, Yiguchen had directly raised the power of the blood cloud puppet to the life and death threshold. Naturally, the consumption of the demonic cloud blood crystal was even greater. Right now, my strength has yet to recover. The blood cloud centipede is a layer of protection. I can't use up all the power of the demonic cloud blood crystal. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. If the devil cloud blood crystal's energy ran out, then the blood cloud centipede would only be a decoration. I can't delay any longer. I have to kill that flying feather tiger immediately. Yi Guchen's eyes were resolute. He directly urged the blood cloud centipede. Receiving the order, the blood cloud centipede pounced on the flying feather tiger. Each of its punches contained a power that even life and death threshold experts would be wary of. Boom! 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 After a round of fighting, the flying feather tiger was directly smashed to death by the blood cloud centipede's fists. Of course, the demonic cloud blood crystal's energy had also been greatly consumed. It was almost the same as the total amount of energy it had consumed before. Damn it! Fortunately, little Yi has this puppet. The divine condor landed with Yi Guchen on its back. With a peck of its sharp beak, it directly pecked out the demonic core of the flying feather tiger and swallowed it. This is the demonic core of a 5th-rank demonic beast. Brother Condor, you can actually swallow it directly? Yi Guchen was astonished. Kaka, Grandpa Condor's bloodline is not for show. The divine condor smiled proudly. Then, they set off again, flying toward the deepest part of the mountain range. Along the way, they encountered another 2 5th-rank demonic beasts. They were both killed by the blood cloud centipede. The demonic core was swallowed by the divine condor. As for the demonic cloud blood crystal in the blood cloud centipede's brain, almost half of its energy had been consumed. No wonder not many people enter this place. These 5th-rank demonic beasts, which are comparable to the hidden latch of life and death, are enough to block everyone. Yi Guchen sighed inwardly. Then, they finally entered the deepest part of the mountain range and saw the place where the demonic aura was fluctuating. It was a mountain valley. In the mountain valley, flames and flames soared into the sky, bringing with them an extremely hot aura. The entire mountain valley was burning with flames. In the flames, the remains of a huge demonic beast could be vaguely seen. Although it had been worn down by time, the vigorous demonic aura and flames were still burning. That's the pressure of a 7th-rank demonic beast. Yi Guchen was momentarily stunned. The divine condor's eyes were blood red, and he couldn't stop panting. Judging from the pressure of this skeleton, it was indeed the remains of a 7th-rank demonic beast. A 7th-rank demonic beast was a powerful existence comparable to a human venerable in the heavenly palace realm. There is a 7th-rank demonic beast. It seems that the Void Sword faction in ancient times is indeed not comparable to the 7 superpowers. Yi Guchen suppressed his surprise and couldn't help but stare. Although only the skeleton was left, the unique aura of the demonic beast couldn't be dissipated. It's a 7th-rank demonic beast, the Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow. I'm rich, I'm rich. This Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow has a trace of the vermilion bird's bloodline. It's very beneficial to me. The divine condor flapped his wings excitedly and couldn't stop laughing. As Yi Guchen approached the remains of the Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow, the 5-color golden core in his body trembled even more violently. Then, in the 5-color golden core, the area where the vermilion bird's totem was carved suddenly lit up with a red light. The red light emitted from Yi Guchen's body and directly covered the remains of the Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow. It's here again. Yi Guchen stared carefully. This was the second time the 5-color golden core had such a strange change. Just as the red light covered the remains of the Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow, Yi Guchen seemed to hear a loud and clear cry. Then, an illusory demonic soul that was burning with red flames was directly extracted. It's the demonic soul of the Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow. Yi Guchen's eyes narrowed. How is this possible? Little Yi, how can you extract a demonic soul? The divine condor was also extremely surprised. As a seventh-rank demonic beast, the demonic soul of the heavenly fire divine sparrow was obviously several times stronger than that of the black dragon python. Moreover, the vermilion bird's bloodline in its body was far superior to the green dragon's bloodline in the black dragon python's body. However, no matter how hard the demonic soul of the heavenly fire divine sparrow struggled, it couldn't get rid of the red light emitted by the five-color golden core. In the end, it was directly sucked in. As the demonic soul was sucked into the five-color golden core, the golden core became extremely hot. Yiguchen's skin suddenly became extremely hot, as if he was being roasted in a furnace. He hurriedly sat down cross-legged, calmed his mind, and performed the indestructible body of Vajra at the same time. The five-color golden core in his dantian spun, emitting rays of red light. Yiguchen, who was sitting cross-legged, could feel the scorching fire element in the heavens and earth. Could it be that I can use this to comprehend the fire essence realm? Yiguchen was a little surprised. Ga, Grandpa Condor is also going to look for the blood essence. The divine condor directly entered the remains of the heavenly fire divine sparrow to search for the blood essence to refine. Just as the man and the condor were digesting their own opportunities, outside the mountain range, a genius who was emitting a scorching aura appeared. He stared into the depths of the mountain range with a trace of surprise in his eyes. The aura of those demonic beasts is gone. Who killed them? Or did they leave? No matter what, I have to go in and take a look. I can feel the aura. It's the aura of a powerful fire seed. The young man who spoke was wearing a red robe and had a head of red short hair. He was the little flame emperor of the three imperial palaces, Ji Yen. Chapter 286. Within the call, flames soared into the sky. Even though the heavenly fire divine sparrow had been dead for a long time, the flames were still blazing. The heavenly fire divine sparrow had a trace of the vermilion bird bloodline, and its body contained the vermilion bird divine fire. This divine fire was comparable to the special fire of heaven and earth, and was extraordinarily hot. Yiguchen sat cross-legged beside the call, closing his eyes and comprehending. When the heavenly fire divine sparrow's demonic soul was absorbed into the five-colored golden core, Yiguchen's mind suddenly became more sensitive to the fire element. In his perception, this fiery mountain valley had almost turned into countless dense fire elemental light spots. The Tao of fire, formless, violent, swift. Yiguchen was comprehending. Although the five-colored golden core had absorbed the black dragon python's demonic soul, the black dragon python's quality was clearly not enough for Yiguchen to comprehend the Tao of wood. But now, after absorbing the rank 7 demonic soul, Yiguchen's understanding of fire was extremely clear. Gradually, Yiguchen felt a burning sensation in his chest. It was as if a piece of red-hot iron was stuck to his chest. This burning pain was unbearable for an ordinary person. But Yiguchen did not seem to hear it, and sat cross-legged in meditation. With his temperament, this level of pain was almost negligible. Finally, the five-colored golden core in Yiguchen's dantian trembled violently, releasing a strange, blazing energy. This power converged on Yiguchen's chest, and gradually manifested into a crimson totem. It was the vermilion bird totem. And Yiguchen could clearly feel that the vermilion bird totem's power was more powerful than the azure dragon totem on his left arm. This did not mean that the vermilion bird totem was more powerful than the azure dragon totem, but that the black dragon python's demonic soul alone could not fully condense the azure dragon totem. Although the vermilion bird totem's power was not fully condensed, it was clearly more powerful than the azure dragon totem. Yiguchen tried to activate the vermilion bird totem's power. In the next instant, the vermilion bird totem on Yiguchen's chest suddenly erupted with a crimson light. Yiguchen immediately felt the power of the totem spreading out and gathering behind him. As an extremely hot feeling spread out, a pair of fire wings condensed by the power of the totem appeared behind Yiguchen's back. This pair of fiery wings was extremely beautiful. They burned with burning flames, just like the wings of a vermilion bird. As they flapped slowly, an extremely hot aura spread out. This is the wings of the vermilion bird. Yiguchen had never thought that he would really be able to use the power of totems. Of course, Yiguchen was able to use the power of the totem largely because of the 5-colored golden core in his body. The Azure Dragon Totem gave me the Azure Dragon Claw, and the Vermilion Bird Totem gave me the Vermilion Bird Wings. I think the other totems also have their own uses. Moreover, these totems can also help me comprehend their own concepts. If I fuse them with my sword essence, maybe I can use the 5-colored totems to comprehend the 5-element sword essence. Yiguchen's eyes shone brightly. Both the Azure Dragon Totem and the Vermilion Bird Totem were supreme totems that represented one of the 5 elements Tao. If Yiguchen could comprehend their concepts and fuse them with his sword essence, he might be able to comprehend the 5 elements sword essence. If the 5 elements were separated, a single sword essence, such as Yushicho's water sword essence, could only be considered an ordinary sword essence. However, if the 5 elements were combined and condensed into the 5 elements sword essence, it would be a peerless sword essence. The peerless 5 elements sword essence. At this moment, Yiguchen seemed to have found a direction. However, his 2 totems had not fully awakened, so he could only suppress them for now. On the other side, the Divine Condor was searching for the essence blood in the remains of the Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow. The essence blood existed in the bone marrow of the Heavenly Fire Divine Sparrow. The Divine Condor had spent a lot of effort to find it. The essence blood was extremely viscous, like blood agate, and carried with it a vigorous and pure fluctuation. Without hesitation, the Divine Condor swallowed the essence blood into its stomach. In an instant, the Divine Condor's entire body was on fire, and its feathers were almost on fire. It opened its sharp beak and kept breathing fire. Yiguchen was not worried about the Divine Condor. Its bloodline was extraordinary. However, Yiguchen suddenly saw that there was a fire seed in the Heaven Fire Divine Sparrow's body. It was located at its ribs. That's the divine fire of the vermilion bird. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. He had not noticed the changes in the 5-colored golden core before. He only noticed it now. The power of the divine fire of the vermilion bird was not inferior to the special flames of heaven and earth. Not only that, if it was refined, it would be greatly beneficial to the vermilion bird totem. However, just as Yiguchen was about to take the fire seed of the divine fire of the vermilion bird, a surprised and shocked voice suddenly rang out. That's the divine fire of the vermilion bird. As soon as the voice rang out, Yiguchen turned around abruptly and looked at the young man who was rushing toward him. He was dressed in red and had a head of fiery red hair. His strange red crystal-like eyes were looking at the fire seed of the divine fire of the vermilion bird with a trace of extreme heat. It was the little Yen Emperor of the 3 imperial palaces, Ji Yen. This pressure is from a 7th-rank demonic beast. Furthermore, it's a 7th-rank demonic beast with the bloodline of the vermilion bird. Yiguchen, you're really lucky. Ji Yen looked at Yiguchen with a sharp gaze. Obviously, he did not think that Yiguchen had the ability to deal with the demonic beasts in the mountain range. He thought that Yiguchen had just picked up a bargain. Yiguchen ignored Ji Yen and rushed toward the divine fire of the vermilion bird. Leave it for me. Whether it's the divine fire of the vermilion bird or the blood essence, both are greatly beneficial to me. Yiguchen, with your genuine qi gone, you can't protect them. Ji Yen did not hesitate and attacked directly. He punched out with a powerful flaming genuine qi and the aura of the 7th transformation of the divine soul realm. Yiguchen raised his eyebrows. At this moment, the divine condor had just swallowed the blood essence of the heavenly fire divine sparrow and was on fire. It could not help Yiguchen for the time being. Yiguchen's eyes flashed in the face of Ji Yan's powerful punch. He did not immediately summon the blood cloud centipede. Instead, he wanted to test the strength of his totemic power. Yi Guchen first activated the invincible Vajra body. His entire body glowed with a golden light, and he looked like a golden arhat. He carried with him a powerful aura that could shatter the earth and collapse mountains. He also punched out. The blazing vermilion bird totemic power erupted like flames, and it was extremely hot. What? Didn't you lose all your genuine qi? How is this possible? Ji Yan's eyes were filled with shock. Boom! With a loud bang, a blazing wave of energy rippled out in all directions. Yi Guchen let out a muffled groan in his chest, and retreated a few dozen steps. On the other hand, Ji Yan only retreated a few steps. However, Ji Yan's face was still filled with shock. No, that's not genuine qi. That's totemic power. How is this possible? How can you possess the barbarian tribe's totemic power? Ji Yan's eyes were filled with shock. He had been to the Great Wall of the Great Desolate Prefecture and fought with some of the saints and saintesses of the Five Elements barbarian tribe. Naturally, he knew about this totemic power. However, what surprised Ji Yan the most was that he realized that Yi Guchen's totemic power was purer than the totemic power of the saints and saintesses. Cough. Yi Guchen coughed dryly and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. With his genuine qi cultivation, it was still a little difficult for him to deal with a seventh transformation prodigy. However, what surprised Yi Guchen was that he could indeed use this totemic power freely. Yi Guchen, so what if you can use the totemic power? You still can't overturn the heavens. Ji Yan slowly raised his hand and snapped his fingers. In the blink of an eye, a scarlet flame spewed out and burned fiercely. Heavenly mystical fire. Yi Guchen's eyes narrowed. Chapter 287. Rare flames of heaven and earth were extremely rare. Yi Guchen had once obtained the heavenly sun Xianming fire by chance, but that was only by chance. Now, Ji Yan had also summoned his own rare flame of heaven and earth. The scarlet flames that spewed out emitted a heart-palpitating temperature. At the same time, Yi Guchen could also feel the violent aura contained in the flames. Yi Guchen, I'll show you the power of the crimson bright flame. Flames rose from Ji Yan's palm, rolling and surging, turning into a fireball that blasted directly at Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed as he summoned his own rare flame of heaven and earth, the heavenly sun Xianming fire. Scarlet flames mixed with dark blue surged out. At the same time, he held the meteor's soft sword in his hand. The flames spread along the sharp blade, and then the entire sword was covered in raging flames. You really do have a rare flame of heaven and earth. Ji Yan's eyes narrowed. He cultivated a fire attribute cultivation method, and by chance, he had obtained the extremely powerful crimson bright heavenly flame. Even so, he still desired more rare flames of heaven and earth. The more rare flames he refined, the stronger he would be. This was also the reason why Ji Yan wanted the vermilion bird divine flame. Swoosh! The meteor's soft sword that carried the heavenly sun Xianming fire stabbed at the fireball formed by the crimson bright flame. In an instant, the flames surged, scattering in all directions. Yi Guchen's figure also retreated continuously. Yi Guchen, are you still going to pointlessly resist? If you continue to struggle, perhaps I'll have to take the rare flame of heaven and earth that you possess. Ji Yan stared at Yi Guchen's heavenly sun Xianming fire with blazing eyes. Although the heavenly sun Xianming fire had been refined by Yi Guchen, Ji Yan still had the means to strip it. Naive. Yi Guchen's eyes were cold, without the slightest fluctuation. You're courting death. Do you still think you're the sword master Yi Guchen of the past? Ji Yan had a violent temper. His eyes darkened when he heard Yi Guchen's words. Flame devil burning heaven seal. Ji Yan formed a seal with his hands and the crimson bright fire gathered together, turning into a red demonic seal that carried with it surging waves of heat. With Ji Yan's cultivation at the seventh transformation of the divine soul realm, his true qi had long since condensed into a physical form. At this moment, he carried the flame demon burning heaven seal and blasted towards Yiguchen with a powerful aura. At this moment, Yiguchen's mind was completely empty as he activated the vermilion bird totem on his chest with all his might. The vermilion bird totem was one of the Tao of palm fire. As long as Yiguchen possessed the vermilion bird totem, he would have a certain degree of resistance to any kind of flame, even if it was a unique flame. At this moment, Yiguchen was comprehending the Tao of fire while he was defending himself with his sword. His sword seemed to have transformed into flames, swift, violent, and scorching. Boom! 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 A series of air explosions sounded. The flame demon burning sky seal completely exploded, bringing out a cluster of blazing air waves, causing the originally somewhat charred mountain call to become a charred demonic land. Humph, you overestimate yourself. Ji Yen shook his head slightly as he looked at the figure drowned in the crimson bright fire. However, just as Ji Yen was about to collect the vermilion bird divine fire, a figure slowly walked out of the remaining flames. Ji Yan's heart thumped. Yiguchen walked out of the strange flames unscathed. A pair of extremely gorgeous fiery red wings appeared on his back. The wings folded together like a fire shield, isolating Yiguchen's body from the crimson bright fire. Not only that, Yiguchen even began to absorb the surrounding crimson bright fire to strengthen his vermilion bird totem. How is this possible? Ji Yan's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He naturally knew how powerful his crimson bright fire was. Not to mention Yiguchen, who had no true chi, even a prodigy at the 7th transformation of the divine soul realm of the same level would be very wary of his crimson bright fire. Unfortunately, Yiguchen's vermilion bird totem was the strongest fire attribute totem and just happened to restrain all flames. Although it didn't make Yiguchen completely immune to the power of the crimson bright fire, there was no need for him to be overly wary. Let's do it again. Yiguchen's eyes were very bright as he struck out with his sword again. While he was dueling with Ji Yen, he was also using Ji Yen as a whetstone to comprehend the concept of fire contained within the vermilion bird totem. Yiguchen wanted to fuse sword intent and concept of fire together to derive the sword intent of fire. As Yiguchen and Ji Yen exchanged blows again, the crimson bright fire and heavenly sun dark fire in the field also splashed in all directions. However, what shocked Ji Yen was that as he exchanged blows with Yiguchen, he increasingly discovered that Yiguchen's swordsmanship was more violent and swift like flames. Ji Yen also vaguely sensed the violent sword intent that Yiguchen exuded. Damn it, the sword sect is using me to test their swordsmanship. Ji Yan's expression was also extremely gloomy. As one of the 3 princes of the 3 imperial palaces, his status was extraordinary. Apart from the 2 people ranked above him, he could be said to be high and mighty. Even if he couldn't defeat a top prodigy like Xian Hao, he still had a shred of ability to protect himself. However, Yiguchen's true chi was completely crippled. He was only using the power of the totem, yet he could still contend with him for so long. Ji Yen couldn't accept this. Of course, this was also because the vermilion bird totem just happened to restrain fire. Otherwise, with Yiguchen's current strength, it would be difficult for him to contend with a prodigy like Ji Yen, who was at the 7th transformation of the divine soul stage. Yiguchen, you've really angered me. Ji Yen gritted his teeth. The origin ring on his finger flashed as he took out a crimson fan. This fan was covered in spirit patterns that faintly formed a formation. It was clearly a powerful weapon with spirit patterns. Mystical Fire Treasure Fan, Heavenly Fire Waterfall. Ji Yen held the Mystical Fire Treasure Fan and gently fanned it. In an instant, flames surged out wildly. The intensity of the flames was far greater than before. It's about time. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. The reason he had personally taken action before was firstly to test his usage of the totem's power, and secondly to train his fire sword will. Now that Ji Yen had even taken out a weapon with spirit patterns, Yiguchen's current strength was still very difficult to contend with. he was very decisive. With a flash of his origin ring, he took out the blood cloud puppet. The blood-red figure flashed out, directly ignoring the raging flames that covered the sky. With a punch, the surrounding air was completely compressed. Even the flames seemed to be blocked by a wall of air, unable to threaten Yiguchen. This is a puppet, damn it. The moment Ji Yan saw the blood cloud puppet, the corners of his eyes twitched. He naturally sensed the strength of this puppet. Boom! The blood cloud puppet punched out. Ji Yan hurriedly used the mystical fire treasure fan to block, but in the end, he was still crushed by the huge force. Although Yiguchen did not let the blood cloud puppet unleash the power of the life and death hidden latch in order to conserve the energy of the demonic cloud blood crystal, this punch was enough to injure Ji Yan. Damn it, Yiguchen, since you have such a puppet, you actually fought with me for so long. You're using me as a whetstone. Ji Yan's expression was extremely ugly. I still have to thank you. Yiguchen smiled faintly. Pfft. Hearing Yiguchen's indifferent tone, Ji Yan was so angry that he almost vomited blood. All the pores on his body seemed to be spewing flames of anger. He looked at the blood cloud puppet, then glanced at the vermilion bird divine fire reluctantly. He gritted his teeth and suddenly retreated. Sword Sect Yiguchen, very good. I, Little Flame Emperor, will remember you. Ji Yan's figure retreated explosively as he executed one of his movement techniques, which was like a blazing fire. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. If he used the vermilion bird wings, he might be able to catch up. However, there was already a huge commotion here. In addition, the rank 5 demonic beasts had already been killed by the blood cloud puppet. It would definitely attract the attention of many prodigies and elites. I can't stay here for long. Collect the vermilion bird divine fire. Yiguchen was determined. Chapter 288. Yiguchen rushed to the remains of the heavenly fire divine sparrow. Behind him, the wings of the vermilion bird flapped slowly. With the protection of the wings of the vermilion bird and the vermilion bird totem, Yiguchen was immune to the flames here. He entered the remains of the heavenly fire divine sparrow and activated the vermilion bird totem on his chest. At the same time, he reached out and grabbed the divine fire of the vermilion bird. Just as Yiguchen touched the divine fire of the vermilion bird, the 5-colored golden core in his dantian shone again. The divine fire of the vermilion bird turned into a stream of red light and entered the 5-colored golden core in Yiguchen's dantian. As the divine fire of the vermilion bird was absorbed into the 5-colored golden core, the vermilion bird totem on Yiguchen's chest seemed to become brighter. Vaguely, he could hear the loud cry of the vermilion bird. At this moment, the divine fire of the vermilion bird surged around Yiguchen. The power of this red flame was even stronger than the heavenly sun Xianming fire. At the same time, Yiguchen seemed to have gained a deeper understanding of the Tao of fire. This is not a place for enlightenment. Let's find a quieter place. Yiguchen temporarily suppressed the enlightenment in his heart. He could vaguely sense the sound of rushing wind coming from outside the mountain range. Just as Yiguchen was about to call the divine eagle to leave with him, he suddenly realized that the divine eagle had collapsed on the ground, its body on fire. Brother Eagle, what happened to you? Even with Yiguchen's composure, he was shocked. He had only been distracted for a moment, and the divine eagle had become like this. Damn it, Grandpa Condor will not eat too much next time. Ouch, Grandpa Condor's stomach hurts. The divine eagle wailed, its body on fire. It had already swallowed the monster cores of several rank 5 demonic beasts. Now, it had absorbed all the blood of the heavenly fire divine sparrow. With that kind of vigorous energy, if it was an ordinary rank 4 demonic beast, it would have long exploded and died. However, the divine condor's physique and bloodline seemed to be very special. Although it looked half dead, Yiguchen examined it carefully and found that it was not in mortal danger. Then, under Yiguchen's astonished gaze, the divine eagle's body slowly shrank in a ball of red light. In the end, the entire body of the divine eagle was engulfed in flames. Brother Condor. Yiguchen's eyelids twitched. Don't worry, little Yi. Grandpa Condor is about to transform. Remember to take good care of me. Amidst the flames, the voice of the divine condor grew smaller and smaller, and more tender. In the end, it sounded like the voice of a baby. Finally, the flames dissipated and an egg appeared in front of Yiguchen. It was a fiery red egg that looked like a crimson crystal. Its surface was covered with countless mysterious demonic patterns. It looked very ancient and complicated. Inside the egg, there was an extremely vigorous energy. Yiguchen was momentarily stunned. He also did not expect that the divine eagle would turn into a crimson egg in the end. Let's leave first. Yiguchen put away the crimson egg. He realized that this egg could be stored in an origin ring. Normally, origin rings could not contain living things. Looks like this is Brother Condor's opportunity. Yiguchen thought to himself. The wings of the vermilion bird appeared behind his back. They were extremely beautiful. The wings of the vermilion bird were not real. They were formed by the power of totems. On the wings, there were flaming light and flowing rune patterns. Yiguchen's vermilion bird wings flapped. His body blurred instantly and turned into a streak of red light. In the blink of an eye, he flashed away. Not long after, the sound of rushing wind could be heard. There were elite disciples from various forces. Their eyes were fixed on the remains of the divine eagle as they beat their chests and stamped their feet. The vermilion bird divine fire, blood essence, and other things had been taken by Yiguchen and the divine eagle. Naturally, this place had no value. Sigh, we're a step too late. Someone sighed. Did you see a figure flapping its wings and flying away? Someone asked suspiciously. He seemed to have seen a streak of red light fly away. Are you stupid? Wings of true chi. That's a skill that only life and death chamber experts have. Do you think any of the 7 forces have broken through to the life and death chamber? Someone snorted coldly. That's right. My eyes must be playing tricks on me. That person said embarrassedly. The ancient mountain forest stretched as far as the eye could see. Many dilapidated palaces were scattered in the forest, bringing with them a desolate and decadent aura. In the air, a streak of red light flew over and stopped in midair. As the gorgeous red wings flapped, the surrounding air was slightly distorted. A wave of blazing light was emitted. It was Yiguchen. He looked around and found that there was no one else here. Then, he landed. In this void sword realm, it's better to keep a low profile. After the wings of vermilion bird is displayed, although I can fly and my speed is also very fast, the surging flame is too conspicuous. It's easy to be secretly watched by others. Yiguchen's eyes flashed and he thought to himself. At the same time, he also found that maintaining the vermilion bird wings consumed a lot of totem power. At least, with Yiguchen's current totem power, he couldn't maintain it for a long time. But no matter what, I already have a goal. Yiguchen's eyes flashed with a trace of excitement. He saw another path of sword principle. Through the 5-colored totem, he could comprehend the Tao of 5 elements and condense the sword intent of 5 elements. Then, Yiguchen also began to comprehend the sword intent of fire in this place where no one would disturb him. After absorbing the vermilion bird divine fire, Yiguchen's vermilion bird totem power became stronger. His comprehension of the Tao of fire also deepened a lot. Yiguchen drew his sword. The sword momentum was as fast and violent as a raging fire. The Tao of fire was the Tao of violent burning. The sword intent of fire was extremely powerful. Yiguchen put a leaf of enlightenment in his mouth. In an instant, there was a kind of enlightenment in his heart. Perhaps it was difficult to comprehend the peerless sword intent. But if it was an ordinary sword intent, it was not impossible for Yiguchen. In this way, a day passed. Yiguchen kept practicing his sword. The surrounding land had already been scorched black. His sword momentum was like a violent explosion. As soon as he drew his sword, the flames flashed and directly burned a towering ancient tree in front of him into charcoal. Then, it exploded into countless flying ashes. The prototype of the sword intent of fire has been formed. Yiguchen was panting slightly. He was sweating all over. Now, he had some understanding of the sword intent of fire, but he had not really mastered it yet. As long as I can completely awaken the vermilion bird totem, I can directly master the sword intent of fire. Yiguchen's eyes shone with certainty. The best way to awaken all the totems on the 5-color golden core was to go to the land of 5 elements. There were not only demonic beasts in the land of 5 elements, but also many divine objects of the 5 elements. It was very helpful for comprehending the Tao of the 5 elements. After the breakthrough in the Void Sword realm, I'll see if there's a chance to go to the land of 5 elements. On the one hand, I'll find the divine medicine. On the other hand, I'll transform the 5-color totem. Yiguchen had a plan in mind. The power of the totem was a kind of power that was not weaker than genuine qi. Otherwise, the holy sons and holy daughters of the 5 elements brute tribe would not have been able to compete with the geniuses of the 7 superpowers. Just as Yiguchen was thinking about the next arrangements, the communication jade slip in his origin ring suddenly reacted. Brother Yi, quickly come and join us. The sword pavilion is open. Chu Qingqi's voice came. The sword pavilion? With the background of the Void Sword faction, what kind of swordsmanship is hidden in it? Yiguchen's eyes lit up again. Yiguchen was also very curious about the famous opportunity land in the Void Sword realm. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.